So for those of you who just joined us, welcome ever so much. Thank you for coming. Today is our DNA Day, the series finale, or should I say the season finale of our Black History Month Salon series. We have a number of exciting speakers, including yours truly, the Genetic Genealogist Program Director for the Descendants Association, Shannon Christmas, and I'm blessed to be joined by representatives of Ancestry and Living DNA and Family Tree DNA, including Nika Smith, Martin and Gerard from Living DNA, as well as Sherman from Family Tree DNA. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, our invited speakers from 23andMe and MyHeritage, as the last minute, had to take care of some other issues, and those issues don't allow them to be with us today, but they may in fact be with us at a later date. So stay up to the news, as they say, for any information about that. Okay. And so we will just go ahead and get started with today's lectures. We will begin with a conversation about the basics of DNA and genetic genealogy, and then allow each of our invited speakers to present their presentations. There will also be a video case study as part of the introduction to finding family using DNA testing and genetic genealogy. So please give all of the invited speakers a round of applause, virtually, of course, and be ready to ask any questions that you have once each of the presentations has ended. All questions will be asked in a sort of round robin fashion once the presentations are complete. So thank you ever so much. And we will begin discussing the basics of DNA and genetic genealogy momentarily. Right. So just out of curiosity, how many of you here have already taken a DNA test of some type? Feel free to raise your hands or mention in the chat where you've tested. I'm curious. Here's how many of you have already tested at, say, Ancestry DNA versus 23andMe or MyHeritage, Living DNA, Family Tree DNA. And feel free to share what you've learned from your results thus far. Do you consider yourself a beginner at genetic genealogy? Are you an intermediate genetic genealogist, or do you consider yourself an advanced researcher at this point in terms of your use of DNA? Wonderful, wonderful. Well, for those of you who are new to DNA testing, this will be a real slap in the face, as they say. For those of you who are more advanced, this will be old hat, if you will. So moving right along with our introduction to finding family with DNA testing and genetic genealogy, you should expect that if you've already attended our full genealogy lecture series, that much of this will be a reprise of our DNA talk there. But do pay attention and take notes so that you can ask questions once all of our presentations have come to an end. Thank you ever so much. All right. So just one moment here. Okay. And we still have a few attendees who are still joining us. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so glad to have you all. It's always a great gift to be in the company of great people. All right. So this introduction to finding family with DNA testing and genetic genealogy is just like it sounds, an introduction. It covers DNA basics. Many of us who have come to DNA testing or genetic genealogy have come with similar questions, specifically seeking to identify the places where our ancestors originated, or seeking to identify biological fathers of ancestors, or just trying to break down brick walls generally. And so budding genealogists are always taught to begin with, of course, documentary research. But there are challenges that come with documentary research. For instance, in many cases, individuals will find it very challenging to find birth records prior to the 19th century, depending on where their ancestors were born. You may also find that the US Census, another go-to source for beginning genealogists, often contains inaccurate or inconclusive information. And then the state and local records are often incomplete, especially if you are researching in the American South, because there's a lot of record loss in this country, and particularly in that part of the country. Many records in courthouses and other repositories in the American South have been destroyed by either natural disasters or man-made disasters. So then we look to oral history, and that comes with its own set of problems. Now, oral history is often the purview of what I like to call the country genealogist. That character who tells you that, oh, you just need to listen to what grandmama said. You just need to find a 100-year-old woman in the woods with a Bible. You need to stop looking at those records. But what reality has taught me is that often these oral histories can make a great springboard for documentary research. The information that you are hearing from your relatives is information that has been passed down through the generations over time. And over time, some of those facts have been miscommunicated. And in other cases, the oral history that you needed for certain lines dies with an ancestor who died before they were able to tell anyone anything, or before anyone was interested in knowing anything. So that creates controversy, that creates discrepancies. And whatever the country genealogist might say about it, people lie. DNA does not. If you learn how to read DNA, you can potentially reconcile the discrepancies in documentary records and oral history. Fill in the gaps that the archives have left for you, and also give voice to the ancestors who have been silenced by traditional archiving. So we turn to several different types of genetic information to answer the questions, to fill in the gaps. Documentary research and oral history by themselves would not. Specifically, we turn to Y chromosome DNA, For those who are not remembering 7th grade biology or 9th grade biology, the Y chromosome is a sex chromosome. In other words, it is used to determine biological gender. For those who are not familiar with the term chromosome, for our purposes, it is simply a package for genetic information. It is a package for DNA. And the Y chromosome is one of several chromosomes that are passed down from parent to child. But in the case of the Y chromosome, it is only passed down from father to son, each generation, which makes it perfect for tracing direct paternal lines. Our father's 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 father. Women do not have Y chromosomes. Humans who are biologically female will not have a Y chromosome. So just keep that in mind. Mitochondrial DNA is a type of DNA that is referring to DNA that you find within what we call mitochondria. It is not packaged like a chromosome. It is, in fact, mitochondria, a specific type of feature that you find in a cell that powers the cell. And so it is transmitted from mother to child in humans each generation and allows you to trace direct maternal lines, one's mother's 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 line. Okay? Now, autosomal DNA and X chromosome DNA work a little bit differently. Autosomal DNA, which you can also call automatic DNA, refers to the DNA that you automatically receive from each of your parents on chromosomes 1 through 22. You get one set of chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 from your father. And you get another set of those chromosomes from your mother. And each of those chromosomes contains genetic information that was passed down from all of your ancestors within at least the last 5 generations, which allows you to trace all of one's family lines. On the other hand, the X chromosome, like the Y chromosome, is a sex chromosome, meaning that it too is used to determine biological gender in humans. In other words, men, biological men, are going to inherit only one copy of the X chromosome. And it always comes from that man's mother, always. Women, on the other hand, have 2 copies of the X chromosome, one from their mothers and one from their father. And this will allow you to trace a subset of ancestors. And for men, those X chromosome ancestors are always going to be maternal ancestors. So for men, any X chromosome DNA match that a man has is a maternal match. They share an ancestor on that man's maternal side. For women, because they inherit 2 copies of the X chromosome, one from the father and one from the mother, the match could be maternal or paternal. So these are all fantastic features of our genetic inheritance that are easily used for tracing one's ancestors. And we will talk more about that. So as you can see from this chart, Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing allow you to trace 1 to 2% of your overall ancestry. You only get to trace 2 lines with Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA. And if you are someone who is biologically female, you do not have a Y chromosome, which means if you want to look at the place of origin for your direct paternal line, then you, not having a Y DNA, or should I say a Y chromosome, will need to get a direct male line descendant to test. In other words, if you have a brother or paternal half-brother, then he will have to provide a DNA sample for Y-DNA testing. If your father is still living and willing to test, you will want him to do that to get the Y-DNA information. In other words, what I'm telling you is that no matter how smart a woman may be, a Y-DNA test is a test that she cannot pass. Now, Y-DNA, as I may have mentioned, is great for tracing one's ancestral origins on their father's line, because it is something that you can trace back many hundreds of years and even many thousands of years if used properly, if tested at the appropriate level. And because Y-DNA is passed down from father to son each generation, the same way that surnames are passed down in many Western societies, it is great for testing paternity hypotheses and learning the surname associated or group of surnames associated with one's direct paternal line, making it great for those who are attempting to identify biological fathers. And that worked out especially well for the late John Weeks Jefferson, featured in this photograph here. He is holding a book that includes an illustration of President Thomas Jefferson. Now, John Weeks Jefferson was a direct descendant of Sally Hemings, a woman who was enslaved by President Thomas Jefferson. And the family law was that Sally Hemings's children, including John Weeks Jefferson's direct paternal line ancestor, Eston Hemings, were the children of President Thomas Jefferson. John Weeks Jefferson provided his Y-DNA for testing to see if it would match that of direct male line descendants of President Thomas Jefferson's uncle. And it was a match, providing genetic evidence that perhaps that family law was rooted in fact. So if you want to do Y-DNA testing, your best option is to test a family tree DNA. And to start with getting a Y-DNA 37 test. 37 refers to the number of markers tested. Or if you want, get Y-DNA 67 or Y-DNA 111. The more markers you test, the higher the resolution the results, the more precise your results will be. And again, you want to do this at Family Tree DNA because just generally, it is the only place where you can get this sort of testing done and be matched up with relatives on your direct paternal line. Now, mitochondrial DNA follows a similar inheritance pattern, and that it is passed down from mother to child each generation, making it perfect for tracing one's mother's line. It's because of that inheritance pattern and a number of other features of mitochondrial DNA, it tends to be less genealogically informative. Specifically, mitochondrial DNA is only useful for tracing direct female lines. And as we know, women typically change surnames each generation. What's more, mitochondrial DNA mutates rather slowly. And what that means is that you and another individual can have the exact same mitochondrial DNA, but your most recent common ancestor might be as far back as over 1,000 years ago. And I know that some say that they have traced their family back to Adam and Eve, but I have my doubts. I don't think too many people are able to trace their families back 1,000 years. That said, mitochondrial DNA is quite informative because of its mutation pattern for tracing deep maternal ancestry. In other words, this is great for identifying where in the world, at least at the continental level, was your direct maternal line ancestor prior to arriving in what we now call the United States. Now, for all of the talk of mitochondrial DNA being less genealogically informative, the photo on the right refers to a case where it was very informative for genealogical research. More specifically, the bespectacled gentleman here, Mr. Ibsen, is a direct female line descendant of a sister of King Richard III. And researchers in England over the water had found a cadaver, or should I say, a skeleton, in a car park in England that was suspected to be the remains of King Richard III. So they did their research and found Mr. Ibsen to get a mitochondrial DNA sample to compare to the mitochondrial DNA found in the skeleton, found in the car park. To make a long story short, Mr. Ibsen and the skeleton have the same mitochondrial DNA, providing genetic evidence that the skeleton is in fact that of King Richard III. So there is a case where mitochondrial DNA was helpful. So if you want to do a mitochondrial DNA test, and I do recommend it, then you want to purchase the full mitochondrial sequence at Family Tree DNA. As always, the more markers you test, the higher the resolution, the result. This is great, once again, for tracing direct maternal lines back to a specific place somewhere in the world. Now, autosomal DNA, because it allows you to trace all of your family lines within the last 5 generations, as depicted in this illustration, is far more powerful than Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA alone. As you can see here, you have many more opportunities to discover more about your ancestors with this particular type of DNA. Now, if you want to do autosomal DNA testing, if you want to dig into your automatic DNA, you have a number of options. You can test with 23andMe Ancestry DNA, Family Finder at Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage DNA, and Living DNA. Each of these tests will provide you with what we call a biogeographical analysis, also known as an admixture report or an ethnicity estimate, which gives you a list of percentages for the various places in the world where your ancestors may have originated. You will also receive genetic matches, relatives who share DNA in common with you. That DNA is identified through a process called identity by descent detection, which we will discuss more in depth later, but it largely involves finding pieces of DNA that are identical because you inherited them from a common ancestor. Question is, as it always is, who is that ancestor? Or who is that ancestral couple? Generally, you should expect the genetic relative matching to cover a 400 to 500 year timeline. You will also find that the DNA kits range in price from $99 to $229. And of course, that is the regular price, not the discounted prices that many individuals have become used to. Now, I know that much of the focus of autosomal DNA testing has been on admixture results. And those admixture results, providing you with percentages associated with possible places of origin for various ancestral lines, is a hot topic, to say the least, especially for the social media mavens who are seeking a molecular selfie, or should I say, something else to get their, quote, followers, end quote, to think that they are more interesting than they actually are. The LOL, OMG, everybody look at me crowd. Or in some cases, those individuals who are looking for this particular test or this particular aspect of the test to turn them into something that they are not, to begin the process of cultural misappropriation, demanding to be told that they are a Mandinka warrior, or that they are an Irish prince or a Cherokee princess. But that is not where the true power of this test really lies. The real power of this type of testing is identity by descent detection. In other words, this is where the test will find stretches of shared DNA on chromosomes 1 through 22, and in some cases, on the X chromosome as well. That shared DNA is a gift from your common ancestor, a shared genetic inheritance. And you use this information at Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Finder, MyHeritage DNA, and Living DNA by looking at your list of genetic relatives. And moreover, when you go through this process, you have to understand that the more DNA you share with your matches, and that DNA is calculated, or should I say measured, in centimorgans. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, what is a centimorgan? For our purposes, it is a unit of measurement. Just as we measure the size of a room in square feet, we measure DNA in centimorgans. And again, the more DNA you share, the more closely related you likely are. On the other hand, less DNA you share, the more distantly you are related in most cases. I know that right now, there is sort of a guerrilla group that is promoting using DNA segments as evidence of a relationship, and specifically DNA segments that are smaller than 3 segments. But ladies and gentlemen, as my good friend Michelle says, when they go low, we go high. In other words, you should not think that DNA matches who only share 3 centimorgans with you or less are matches with whom you share identical by descent DNA for certain. Segments that are that small cannot be used as evidence of a genetic connection. You should not go below 7 centimorgans. And some would say you should not even go below 10. And others will say you shouldn't go below 20. That said, I will leave that right where it is, but anything below 7 is likely to be what we call identical by coincidence, meaning that it is not indicative of a recent common ancestor. Okay? And if you have questions, once again, please take a note of those and be ready for the question and answer session. So using this type of DNA, we are even more empowered to break through brick walls, to test paternity hypotheses, and determine where our ancestors originated. Now, here's a case here where a gentleman named Hassani was able to use his DNA matches to determine where in the world his ancestors might have been prior to coming to what we now call the United States. He had DNA matches from all over West Africa, and he took note of the various ethnic groups that they descended from. And moreover, was able to attach specific DNA matches in Africa to specific known lineages, specific known ancestral lines in his family tree. Now, be forewarned that these are modern ethnic groups. In other words, it does not necessarily mean that the ancestors who were brought to the United States were members of these ethnic groups. There is another company that does not do genealogical DNA testing that has promoted the mythology that you can look at a Y-DNA haplogroup or mitochondrial DNA haplogroup at a very basic level and determine what ethnic group the direct male line or direct female line ancestor was from. This is not true. Culture is not biology, and DNA is not culture. And if you have questions about that, once again, I'm happy to answer later in the day. Now, the best way to make use of your DNA matches as a beginner is to cluster your DNA matches. This process, also known as genetic networking, involves identifying groups of DNA matches who all match you and all match each other. They all match you, and if they all match each other, because you each inherited your shared DNA from a common ancestor. If you collect and compare the family trees from the members of those clusters, then you will be able to identify the common ancestor that you each inherited your shared DNA from. Now, I'm sure that sounds rather simple, and it is, if and only if your matches have robust family trees. And more, we are finding that the matches we are receiving have selfies to share, but they do not have family trees. Because of the look at me culture that we have, these individuals have come to DNA testing because they want ethnicity. They don't want you. They are not looking for relatives, dead or alive. They are looking to look at themselves and get more people to look at them. And then they leave the website and return to watching Keeping Up with the Car Crash Dummies and the Fake Housewives of Whereville. They don't have the same interest. So what do? You have to build your matches family trees for them. And that doesn't always require input from them. You have to learn to stalk your matches. You have to learn how to use their narcissism against them, if you will. We will talk more about that. So again, the process of clustering and genetic networking involves identifying and visualizing these groups of DNA matches, matching you and who match each other. In these genetic networks, you will find that the family trees will lead you to a common ancestor. That means you need family tree data to identify that most recent common ancestor. Now, the various DNA websites already provide you with tools to go about this. That's called shared matches at Ancestry DNA and MyHeritage DNA, or in common with at Family Tree DNA, and relatives in common at 23andMe and Living DNA. Once you find those matches and those shared matches, you want to do the pedigree comparison. That means comparing the trees for what you have in common. And if you don't see anything in common, that might be a clue to you. Going back to what I said about the country genealogist, some of those country genealogists will tell you, you just need to listen to what grandmama said. Grandmama said this and grandmama said that. Well, I'm telling you now, grandmama lied in some cases. Or grandmama didn't know. Because the thing is, there are lots of people who have done a lot of things that you don't know about. You don't know everyone who had adult sleepovers in your family tree. But DNA has a way of shedding light on what was done in the dark. So be prepared to learn things that you never thought you'd know. So as you are working with your DNA matches, it is crucial to annotate your match list. Okay? That's the first thing you want to do, is look at your closest matches first. Look at their family trees. If you find a common ancestor immediately, use the note system available at each of these sites to enter that information. And do this for each of the matches and the shared matches. As you see in the slide here on Ancestry DNA, there is the ability to use colored dots to group your matches. You want to assign a colored dot to each specific ancestor or ancestral couple. Or if you need to be more loose with this, you can assign each colored dot to an ancestral line. If you've got a controversy on who the ancestor was, if you will. But I assigned a blue colored dot to one of my closest matches here, my second to third cousin, and found by reviewing the unlinked family tree that our common ancestors were my maternal ancestors, Solomon Neverdon and Zacharetta Blackwell. And so that colored dot was assigned to them and to everyone else who descend from that ancestral couple. Another match, HB, a paternal relative, did not have a family tree. But there was enough information for me to stalk HB, to identify him, and to determine exactly who our common ancestors were. My paternal ancestors, Peter Allen Sr. and Alice Bryant. And I also wrote in the notes exactly how HB descended from Peter and Alice. So you want to do this for all of your matches. Start at your closest match and work your way down. I know that there is a guerrilla group that is now promoting, starting with your most distant matches and working your way up your match list. If you want to instigate some psychosis, that's a great way to go. But trust me, start with the closest first and work your way down. It will work out a lot faster, a lot easier. So here's a little case here. Once upon a time, there was a feature that worked well with Ancestry DNA, where you could cluster your matches and what we called an auto cluster. And so here is a snippet of my auto cluster list, cluster number 1. And you can see in the rectangles on the right that there is a theme, there is a pattern that repeats itself in the notes that I took for the matches that ended up in cluster 1. Common ancestors, Richard Lewis Jr. and Mary Terrell, my great-great-grandparents on my paternal grandmother's side. Everyone for whom I was able to identify a pair of common ancestors descends from Richard Lewis Jr. and Mary Terrell. So this cluster is associated with that couple. However, there were a few matches who are circled here who did not provide me with enough breadcrumbs to determine how they were related for certain. But they ended up in this cluster. So MM, Michael, and Ashley, for whom I have no information other than shared matches, must have something to do with Richard Lewis Jr. and Mary Terrell. So, getting back to stalking, Those matches who refuse to create a family tree may make things a little bit challenging, but it's not a barrier that you cannot overcome. You want to use people search sites, such as Been Verified, to begin researching where your match lives, where they have lived, how old they are, where they may have worked, who their relatives are, and use that information to begin building a family tree for them. You also may find that some matches have created a very basic tree where they've only named their biological parents. And both biological parents may have passed away. Those biological parents may have obituaries that list who their parents are. They may have find a grave entries that contain more information. And again, build these family trees for your matches on Ancestry and Family Search using this information. And keep building those trees until you are able to identify common ancestors. You also should be ready to stalk even harder using Google. As they say, Google is your friend. Those individuals who are part of the selfie generation, who decided to upload a photograph of themselves or multiple photographs of themselves on Ancestry, have provided you with the opportunity to use facial recognition to find more information about them. If you do a right click on their photograph, you will have the opportunity to search Google for this image using Google Lens, but only if you have Google Chrome and are using Google Chrome at that time. You can also search for the username or alias that your match is used on Ancestry or elsewhere to see on what other sites this person is on. But be careful about this, because you may find that there is more information about your match than you ever wanted to know. For instance, one of my matches used the same headshot that they have on Ancestry on a pornographic website called She's Freaky. That was more information than I wanted to see. Others do the same on places such as Adult Friend Finder and other erotic entertainment sites. So just be prepared for that. In other cases, I have found that certain DNA matches have a beautiful array of mugshots because they have been arrested multiple times in multiple jurisdictions. So just be prepared for that as well. Also know that these things may lead you to social media sites where there's more information about your match's relatives, allowing you to use more data to build family trees for them and determine how you are related. So just to do a recap on all of this, continue to enter notes for all of your matches and use colored dots wherever they are available, specifically at Ancestry and MyHeritage. And in the notes, include the names of each of the most recent common ancestors. And again, you can assign each of these groups, each of these clusters, to a specific ancestral line. And any unsolved matches that you find in these clusters, you know, must share some connection to that ancestor associated with that cluster. And so you might use that information to message the match and begin a conversation, assuming that your match is actually interested in conversing with you. So a few steps for success. Number one, start with Ancestry DNA and 23andMe's Ancestry Only Edition. These are the two largest DNA databases, and to get into them, you must test directly. You cannot upload data into those sites. You cannot transfer your raw data from another test into Ancestry or to 23andMe at this time. Once you receive your results from Ancestry and 23andMe, you want to make sure that you move forward and jump into all ponds. Specifically, you want to upload your Ancestry DNA raw data to Family Finder, GEDmatch, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. GEDmatch, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a third-party DNA database, which has a wonderful suite of advanced tools that you will have access to. And the more advanced they are, you should expect to have to pay a monthly subscription fee for. Okay? Now, GEDmatch is used for law enforcement research. If you do not wish to participate in law enforcement research, you can opt out of law enforcement research. But just know that there are some unethical investigative genetic genealogists who are abusing GEDmatch and going against the terms of service. And in those cases, do not get mad, get a lawyer. Family Tree DNA's Family Finder is also used for law enforcement research. And again, you have the option to opt out of law enforcement research at Family Tree DNA. And again, repeat all of these steps for each of your family members. Some of you may be wondering, who are the best family members to test? I can tell you that your parents, grandparents and great-grandparents, and if you have them available, great-great-grandparents are the best sources of DNA. Why? Because they have more DNA from the long-gone ancestors than you do. Each generation you go back, the more DNA they're going to share with the more distant ancestors. And so if you don't have parents available, you want to have a proxy, an aunt, an uncle, or perhaps all of your aunts and uncles. If your grandparents are not available, do you have grand aunts or granduncles? Have them test. You also want to have first cousins, second cousins, and third cousins to serve as sources of genetic data pertaining to grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents. Just be forewarned that while second cousins or closer will always share DNA with you, beyond the second cousin level, more distant cousins, namely third cousins and beyond, are less likely to share DNA with you. In fact, there's about a 10% chance that one of your third cousins will not share DNA with you, will not share autosomal DNA with you, to be more precise. You also need to understand that there are advantages and disadvantages to each of the DNA databases. And I would say that despite those disadvantages, it is best to get into each of these databases because you never know where the match you really need is going to be. So Ancestry DNA is beneficial because it is the largest autosomal DNA database available. It also has perhaps the best family tree interface at this time, but it is lacking in analytic tools compared to some other websites. It also has an internal messaging system that is not always reliable. And there is some false negative matching. That now seems to be an issue at all of the DNA websites. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term false negative matching, that term refers to actual DNA matches of yours not appearing as matches on your match list. And sometimes that is because of how the algorithm at the company works, or in some cases, certain DNA cutoffs, or something much more granular than that. But if you have questions, feel free to ask me later about that. 23andMe is the second largest DNA database, and it is known for having committed to certain diversity projects over the years, particularly projects focused on African DNA as well as Irish DNA. It has been known for having what we call the best chromosome browser. In other words, it has a tool which allows you to see the actual segments, to visualize the DNA segments that you share with your matches, something that Ancestry DNA at this time does not have. But there's a caveat to that. Right now, 23andMe has suspended access to a chromosome browser. That was supposed to be a temporary suspension. We will see what the future holds with that. That said, 23andMe also has some disadvantages. Specifically, the messaging system is not the greatest. It is rather cumbersome. And they also have a system of capped matches, which generates what we call false negative matching once more. So if you test with 23andMe, you should be able to see your closest 1,500 DNA matches. If you want to see more matches, then you have to become a premium subscriber to 23andMe, which you may or may not want to do. If you are a subscriber, last I checked, you should be able to see up to perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 matches. 23andMe is also known for having the highest priced hit on the market if you choose their Ancestry Plus Health option. MyHeritage DNA has a large growing database with a very nice family tree interface. It also has a growing list of tools, but many have complained that some of those tools at MyHeritage require some refinement. Family Tree DNA's Family Finder provides you with another pond to fish in. It also has the most transparent communication mode available. It provides you with the email addresses of your matches, meaning you can just email your matches and not have to worry about any issues with an internal messaging system. But the Family Finder database is a rather small database. And like all of the other databases now, it does have some false negative matching to be concerned about. Living DNA is a growing database based in the United Kingdom, and it is especially good for finding matches based in Europe, and especially in the United Kingdom. The toolkit available for genetic genealogy has grown over the years as well, but it also suffers from an internal messaging system. And some might be thinking, what's the issue with internal messaging? The issue is not every match is logging in on a regular basis. And so that means you can send a message, and that message won't be seen until they log in the next time, unless, of course, they have set up or allowed a setup for those messages being transferred to their email, which not everyone does. So just keep that in mind. Now, it's important for everyone to be patient and keep up their thirst for knowledge. Some of these matches will take years to reply to your messages, if they reply at all. Many I see now read messages, but never reply and have no intention of doing so. A lot of the newer matches do not have trees and require assistance. So be ready to be helpful. The technology is constantly changing, which means you have to constantly re-educate yourself. And just understand that the whole process requires a degree in dentistry, because getting the information you need is like extracting teeth. To always remember, no matter how difficult it becomes, you can do it if you try. Persist until you prevail. Thank you ever so much for listening to this part of the presentation. If you have questions that you are not comfortable asking today, feel free to visit my blog through the treesblog.tumblr.com, and also feel free to email me at throughtheTreesblog@gmail.com. Now, we have a special treat for you today. We have a video case study that shows how these things come together in a discovery. And I'm going to play that for you momentarily. But for the meantime, please stay seated and be ready for this very informative snippet. Thank you ever so much. In the process of analyzing your DNA test results, I found a cluster of DNA matches, a genetic network of genetic relatives who all descend from a Johnson family based in Frederick County, Maryland, and also in Montgomery County, Maryland. Did either of you notice that among your matches at Ancestry?
I don't think we did. No.
Okay.
So is that a pre-sale connection?
So the connection is somewhat distant. In other words, these matches are 4th to 6th cousins or more distant. They're not second cousins, they're not third cousins. But I found this interesting given the story that Eva Mahoney's children were fathered by a man named Johnson. In the documents attached to the tree that you sent us, that man is Thomas Johnson. In the report of the Georgetown Memory Project, that man is Samuel Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be clear, when you have a genetic network, a cluster of DNA matches all going back to the same family, that's an indication that you are part of that family, because they match you and they match each other, and that is because you all share DNA from the same source. And that source is your common ancestor. And so I put that into context when thinking about the Thomas Johnson, Samuel Johnson story. And I then went and thought about something that was rather rudimentary. Has anyone looked for a Samuel Johnson or a Thomas Johnson that was in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, during this time frame, in the 1860s and 70s? And so I found a Thomas Johnson in the 1870 census, living in Lafourche Parish with his parents. He was a plantation manager. What is more, this Thomas Johnson was born in Maryland, as were his parents. Specifically, they were from Frederick County, Maryland, just as your Johnson matches are on Ancestry DNA. In other words, this information seems to suggest that Thomas Johnson in Lafourche Parish is the Thomas Johnson that was identified as Eva Mahoney's, the father of her children. And this is particularly true because, and I want to do a screen share so that you can see what I see.
Beautiful.
Because it is beautiful, I will say that, in its simplicity. Because, let me just go here to the 1870 census.
You mentioned two counties that the cluster is in. What were those two
Yes.
counties?
Frederick County, Maryland, and Montgomery County, Maryland. And it appears that our executive director is joining us after all.
Oh,
And she's still connecting to audio at this time, but I am getting the census record up for you
okay.
so that you can see what I see. So yes, this is the 1870 census for the 3rd ward of Lafourche Parish in Louisiana. The nearest post office was Raceland, Louisiana. Is that familiar to you?
Very much, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the name, yes.
Seen it on the map, yeah.
Okay. And so this is the first census in which all African Americans living were enumerated after their enslavement. And so here you have a Thomas Johnson, 22, male, white, and he is the inferred son of Baker Johnson and Victoria, the former Victoria Hughes, all of Maryland. And you can see here that Baker Johnson has quite a bit of real estate in 1870, as well as personal property. Okay.
Mm.
All right. And before I continue, welcome, Rochelle. How are you today?
Good morning, everyone. So pleased to meet you. I don't know if Shannon got to the good part yet, but I wanted to be here when he tell you if he has it. I'm actually sitting in the clerk of court office in Iberville Parish,
Oh,
and I too have made some terrific finds.
oh my goodness.
So I wanted to chime in and let Shannon do his presentation, and then I'll say what I gotta say.
All right.
But
Thank you
pleased to
for
meet you.
being here. And you.
Yes.
Thank you ever so much. So yes, this is Thomas Johnson in the household of his parents, plantation manager. His father is a planter. And as I said, he has quite a bit of both real property and personal property. And as you look further down the page, you see a long list of African-American households. And people in these households are giving birthplaces that are not only in Louisiana, but also North Carolina, Maryland, and Missouri. But let's turn the page here. So as we go down the page here, we see more of the same, more African-American households with lots of farm laborers. Presumably, they are laboring on the farm of Baker Johnson, or the plantation to be more precise. So you've got John Jackson, Alexander Mel, but here we go. At the very bottom, Mary Mahoney and Eva. And so, given this proximity, and also given the lineage of Thomas Johnson and the lineage of your DNA matches, it's very likely that this is the Thomas Johnson that your family has been referring to as the father of Eva Mahoney's children.
That's very interesting, yes.
My
And
goodness.
there is more. So Thomas Johnson, this Thomas Johnson, lived for quite some time. He died on the 16th of September, 1930 in New Orleans. He did in fact marry and had at least 3 daughters. And they too had issue. So there might be living descendants who may be willing to do a DNA test and be compared to provide further confirmation. We did find an index of his death record. We are awaiting the actual image of his death record. We also have death records for both of his parents, Baker A. Johnson and the former Victoria Hughes. They also died in Louisiana, in Orleans Parish. What is more, we also have a portrait of Thomas Johnson.
Oh my gosh.
And so I will prepare to get that ready for you so that you can see yourself. Do you have any questions?
Oh,
When did he die? I missed that.
The 16th of September, 1930.
Wow. 1930.
30.
He lived a long time.
Yes, he did.
The year Mom was born.
And so, yes, I just had to look for this because typically this sort of thing is very easy to tease out in DNA results unless the family just hasn't tested or the connection was just too distant. But in this case, this just seems a little too coincidental. So I'm going to share the portrait now. And so this is Thomas Johnson. I'll try to expand this a bit, but it has a note attached that I want you to be able to read as well. So he actually ended up working for the U.S. Mint, and that's what he was doing in New Orleans. And so this is obviously him in his older days, not as Eva would have seen him in 1870. But yes, this is his portrait. This is him sitting at his desk.
My goodness.
And so the note at the bottom says Thomas J. Johnson. His middle name was James. moved to New Orleans from Raceland, worked at the Mint as treasurer. I believe this is his office at the Mint.
Amazing.
Thank you. We will now move on to the next presentation by Nika Smith of Ancestry. Thank you ever so much.
Good afternoon to everyone who is here joining. I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk about genealogy and family history. And thank you to the GU 272 org for hosting these series of events to educate everyone about genealogy and family history. I won't be before you long today, just have some information obviously to share about ancestry and ancestry DNA that is a big part of what Shannon talked about. It's a big part of my own personal research. When you talk about some of the surnames that are synonymous with GU, my maiden name, if you're familiar with Southern Maryland, should be sending off, flashing lights. And I was not aware of that until the work of researching the enslaved connected to GU came about. And so just know that as I'm presenting today, I'm one of the people who is currently searching for this information as well. Because I've got all the right stuff. I just haven't found the smoking gun as of yet, but the DNA and stuff is there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll go ahead and get this party started. All right. Many of you obviously have heard, hopefully you've heard of Ancestry, but many people are not aware of the various brands that are under the umbrella of Ancestry. It's not just Ancestry DNA, it's actually Ancestry, the company, which started off as book publishing and then moved into putting the first set of images online to research your genealogy and family history. But in addition to more than 60 billion historical records, which include records like the US Census, marriage, birth, death, we also have newspapers.com. In addition to that, Fold 3, newspapers obviously is newspapers. In fact, if you are interested, we actually have a collection of Black historical newspapers that is available for free during Black History Month. So since we just have another week or so left, be sure to tap into that for your research purposes. In addition, we also have Find a Grave, which is a online cemetery. So if you are not able to go and visit the grave sites of your ancestors, you can do so virtually with volunteers who meet requests to get photographs of headstones. We also have pro-genealogists, which are the folks you can hire to do the research for you. Ancestry Classroom, where we partner with school districts across the country, and hundreds of thousands of young people actually have access to Ancestry for free, in addition to providing curriculum for their lessons in their classroom, as well as Ancestry Institution. If you use us at the library or at your college, university, you may have encountered us there as well. So it's not just DNA, it's a lot of other stuff as well. But since we're here to talk about DNA, let's talk about what's different about Ancestry DNA. As Shannon mentioned earlier, Ancestry DNA is an autosomal DNA test, which means that it tests for both sides of your family. Sometimes when I talk to folks, they think, oh, well, it's just my mom's side because I identify as female, or it's just my father's side because I identify as male. That's not the case. It's testing both sides of your family. In addition, there are 22 regions and 63 ethnic groups in Africa that are part of our test, but that's not just it. It is also it's actually 2,600 regions across the world, but in the context of what we're talking about today, 22 regions in Africa and 63 ethnic groups. Now, you may be wondering what an ethnic group is, and that is a community of people who share common cultural characteristics such as language, religions, customs, traditions, and often ancestry or national origin. And as Shannon correctly pointed out, the ethnic groups that we have as a result of our product are the groups today. as people move and migrate and shift from one location to the next, ethnic groups that existed or in the, the capacity that they did during the transatlantic slave trade may or may not be similar to the ones that are there now. So you have to keep that in mind. In addition to that, one of my favorite parts of Ancestry DNA is what's called DNA journeys. And for some of these that exist within the US as well as within the Caribbean, and outside of that, there are even DNA journeys that are in Africa on the continent. They can drill down to a specific location within that area that can go down to the county or the parish. I'll show you all an example of that from my DNA that you can see, especially for those of you who are trying to find your connections back to GU or maybe just Jesuit enslavement. It may give you a clue as to the geographical region you might need to be looking at. In addition, you can also find other family members who have DNA tested. Again, DNA matching. I would say most of us that are here, many of us who are here, practically live in that part of the site because we're trying to make connections back to our ancestors, whether free or enslaved. You also have the ability to link your DNA to your family tree. That's super important because you're trying to suss out how you're related to your DNA matches. So yes, linking your results to a tree is super important. Additionally, there's also traits. This can tell you things like whether or not you like to dance, what kind of earwax you have if you're interested in that. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, nah. Traits is there, but again, it may not be what you may necessarily use for genealogical purposes. Now, another thing that we have is called through lines, which can help you identify unknown ancestors, and this is based on the trees of your DNA matches. We also can show you common ancestors in your DNA matches family trees, inheritance by parents, ethnicity by parents, DNA journeys by parents, and you can use a chromosome painter. But these require an additional subscription outside of what you pay for your kit price. So the stuff that I talked about before comes with the kit. And then after this particular slide are things that you would need to have an additional subscription or upgrade for you to access. Now, what are the ethnic groups? Many of you may have heard about these, maybe online. The ethnic groups that we have, again, span across Africa. Some of them you may have heard of, like the Bamileke. I've actually been to visit that respective group in Cameroon. Also, a list of these is here. You can find them on the Ancestry site as well as if you visit ancestry.com/Black History. If you scroll to the bottom of that page, you'll get to the Roots to Africa project, which lists out all the ethnic groups and which respective geographical locations they tie back to in Africa. Now, in addition, again, getting your DNA results is great because it's telling you where your ancestors were. But when you combine that information with historical records to build your tree out, you're getting more than just the where. You're finding out about the who and potentially maybe some motivations around things that got you to where you are today. Why are you living in that city? How did you get there? You're kind of missing, I would say, the best part of genetic genealogy by just focusing on locations and admixture percentages and not combining that with the family history research aspect of it. Now, probably the most important slide in what I'm talking about today is your privacy. That is super, super, super important at Ancestry. You maintain ownership over your data and control over your data. That means that you can opt in and out of DNA matches. So if you just want to get the percentages from across the world and you don't want to be, compared, your DNA compared to other people to give you a degree of relatedness, you do not have to participate in that. You also can be as public or private as you want. Some people ask me if they have to use their legal name. You don't have to use your legal name. You can use your login, your username. You can use whatever. I've seen people use some pretty interesting usernames across the site. Additionally, we do not voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. We do not. That is not something that we do. If we are compelled by law enforcement to engage, they have to have a warrant, and a warrant needs to be served just as like if it was not in the online environment. That is something that is super important for you to know. Again, our privacy commitment includes not sharing customer DNA data with insurers, employers, or third-party marketers. We do not engage in that at all. So just know, again, that we value your privacy and that you maintain ownership and control over your data and your information, and we do not voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. All right, so I'm going to pivot just a second and go into my live DNA results so that you all can see what the product offers. And let me go back just a second. All right, there we go. All right, you all give me the thumbs up that you can see. Or just say, yes, I can see. Perfect. Thanks for raising your hand, Shannon. All right. So I've got 13 ancestral regions that are going across the world. My top percentage is in Nigeria. You also see this link to ethnic groups underneath that. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. For those of you who may have already tested, join the other 27 million people who have tested at Ancestry. This is a feature that we rolled out late last year that you may or may not be aware of. Again, it's the ethnic groups. So I'll click into that in a second. But my admixture percentage is very typical for most of the folks that I see that identify as African American. There's nothing that's glaringly different, at least to me. I see a lot of these. It's very similar to most other folks. I think maybe some of you watching this, you may be thinking, oh, that Scotland percentage is super high. But again, I see a lot of these, and that's really no different than anyone else. So we'll stay here for a second. Again, I want to point out this ethnic groups. We're going to come back to that. But I also want to point out DNA journeys, which I mentioned to you can drill down to respective county or region that your ancestors may be connected to. If we go over this particular area, you'll notice that this one, which is early, I think this is early Southern U.S. African Americans, notice it's broken up into two respective areas. It's covering Maryland and Delaware, which of course that connects directly back to the GU 272. And it's covering portions of Louisiana that are connecting back to the GU 272. So that's obvious. The other aspect of this is that it is giving pork chop. I call this one the pork chop because it looks like a pork chop to me. You might not eat pork chops, or you might just see them in the store, but this is the big gigantic one because it definitely details the downward migration of enslaved people within the United States. So this isolated one that's underneath early Southern U.S. African Americans, it includes Virginia, Maryland, and lower Mississippi Valley River African Americans. I also have another one called Early Upper South Settlers that goes across Arkansas and Tennessee. And then the one that I want to drill down into that gets really, really specific is Eastern Louisiana and Western Mississippi African Americans, which drills down to a further area, which is Eastern Louisiana, Mississippi border African Americans, along with this other tiny, tiny one that if you zoom in, you get to a respective location. And this one I want to point out, if you follow my research with the Trash 250, you literally see that the Trash 250, where the plantations were, is covered within this one DNA journey that's here. Now, if we go back to the regions page, I want to point out the ethnic groups. Again, these are available underneath the respective admixture percentages you have. When you click this link, it's going to take you down to a list and it will tell you what's going on. So it says your DNA connects to one or more of these ethnic groups of the Nigeria region, which ranged from the Isan, and anytime you mouse over the respective area, you will see, or the group, you will see where it is mapped to in the respective place. Again, don't pay attention to modern geographical boundaries because they are not exactly what they were when these groups were created. All right. And then the other thing I want to point out is once you click into these, let's see, we can go to the EBO. It's going to load another map that's going to give you geographical information, speaker population, languages, etc. And then to me, the best part of this is if you scroll down just a little bit more, it actually gives you stories that connect back to this respective group. Many of these, I would say a big chunk of them are videos. So if you are interested in connecting back to your respective roots in Nigeria or other places, there's content that goes back to each one of these ethnic groups that will give you information about customs, religion, food, all of that and more. All right. Does anyone have any questions? I see your question, Jerome. Regarding longest segment info between two matching individuals, can Ancestry please consider identifying the specific chromosome as it posts this portion of matched data? Example, longest segment 21 change to longest segment 21 chrome. Okay, got it. I will provide your feedback. Thank you for that. I see your hand raised, Abigail.
Yeah, I was wondering how much weight should we put on the percentages when they are very low geographically? For example, I saw on your breakdown like 1% indigenous, and like for my mom, it's like 1 or 2% Sephardic Jew. I'm just wondering how much weight should we give that?
It really all depends. For instance, I'm an enrolled citizen of a federally recognized tribe, and my percentage was that low.
However, for the rest of us, I mean, is there a discrepancy in terms of whether or not uh, we're connected geographically or ethnically when it's the percentage is that low?
It really, so here's the thing, depending on whether or not a particular ethnic group or ancestry is, both a couple comes together and both of those people come from that community. If that's not the case and only one of those folks comes from that respective community, each time people have children, your potential to inherit that, or the descendants' potential to inherit that ancestry, gets cut in half. So if you have a full great grandparent that's entirely Scottish, if there are no other Scottish people, by the time you get down to the great grandchild, they can only inherit up to 12%. So
Got
it
it.
can be as high as 12 and as low as not inheriting it at all. So really, that's where you really need to pay attention to the paper trail and to see if you can validate it on paper. I typically will pay attention to things that are about 5% and higher, just because it typically is easier to connect through the paper trail. The other thing is, when you test other family members, it's very possible that their percentages may be higher than yours. So you might actually be able to surface it better with another family member as opposed to using yours. I actually talked about that this week on a live stream we had, where I was saying sometimes in order to substantiate a connection to something, or to validate a story, you can't go through your direct ancestor. We want it to fit in a box, and we want to be able to use our great-great-grandparent to do it, to search through them. Sometimes you have to go through a sibling in order for you to get to that information, and DNA is like that a lot.
Got it. And one more question. For many African Americans, DNA results I've seen, the European percentage is pretty high. I mean, I've seen it as high as like 40%, even sometimes 50%, and their biological mom and dad may not necessarily be European, but somewhere along the line, even maybe like in the late 1800s or during times of enslavement, that bloodline was intercepted, which is the case for many of us. I'm just wondering, in terms of doing our family research and building our family tree, because a lot of these people remain anonymous because of rape and other reasons. I'm just wondering, how should we be handling that in our research?
Well, that's the thing. It's the sum of the parts, like Shannon was talking about. You're looking for patterns in surnames, family trees, and locations. And when you keep seeing the same thing over and over and over again, that is your DNA telling you where you need to direct your efforts. So while those individuals may have been anonymous at that particular time, their genetics are being reflected in our genetics. So and in some instances, when you do the process of elimination and you do get those patterns and you find those patterns, it may lead back to a set of brothers and you're unable to decipher which person it is, or it may lead back to a set of sisters. You know what I mean? And until the magic sort of DNA match kind of appears, you may not be able to confirm the exact person, but you at least have a lead on as to who it is. For instance, there's a man that's emerged in my family's DNA on a very particular line, and all I can do is trace him back to the geographical area. That's it. I don't have any correlation whatsoever of his interaction with my ancestor, but I know based on where he was living and where my ancestor was enslaved, that they were in close proximity to each other.
Got it. But in building out our family tree, should we be making a note of that or continue to leave it anonymously? What's your
Well, it's up to you. Really, it truly is. Some people choose not to, some people do. You have the power, Abigail.
Okay, I see that Karen Harper Royal has a question, and then Deborah Brown, and then we have a question from the chat. Nika has to depart a little bit early, so we are having her question and answer period right now. Please save all other questions, not about ancestry, for our Q&A session later today. Thank you. Karen, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And good morning, Nika. And I hope to see you soon in Utah.
Yes, you are right, in another week or so.
Yeah. So I remember when you were doing your research on the your connection to the Cherokee Nation. And I don't know, maybe my glasses need to be replaced, but I could not see. Did you have an indigenous connection? Was it just for the Cherokee, or did it include other Native American tribes?
Yeah, so for me, on paper, my direct my paternal grandmother's line goes directly to the Cherokee Nation. She was born there. And so for me, when you look at my admixture percentages, depending on what the algorithm is saying, it ranges anywhere from 1 to 5%, where I have second cousins, or even my nieces that is higher than mine is. That doesn't mean that I don't have a tie to the nation, because I wouldn't have a card if I didn't have a tie to the nation. It's just that, again, as the generations happen, whoever the quote unquote full-blooded person is, unless that same ancestry is introduced on the opposite side of the family, it's not going to get passed down. So you only have up to a certain percentage. And for me, when we start talking about full-blooded folks, we're talking fourth and fifth grade grandparents. That's really far back. And the other thing is, especially with the Cherokee Nation, when you start going back that far, you also have European ancestry that gets introduced at the same time. So it's not, you know what I mean? As much as we want it to like be this like thing that you can wrap an easy bow on, it's not really. That's the reason why having the records there to substantiate what the genetics is telling you, whether it's from an admixture perspective or it's from a DNA match perspective, is something else. I've heard folks say, oh, well, people who are enrolled in federally recognized tribes don't DNA test, and that's not true. I see them all over my DNA matches.
Well, my great aunt has a 1% Native American admixture. And over the time since we tested her with Ancestry, it ranged from Indigenous Americas North and Indigenous Americas Mexico. So at that time, she had 2%. Then it changed, and now it's down to 1% Indigenous Americas Yucatan Peninsula. She's 97% African, and the other 2% is Wales. And we had a family story that said that it would be my third great grandmother was part Native American. And my grandmother told me this story that she had fallen off of a horse and buggy on her way to New Orleans, and she died. So in the records, I see her on the 1870 census, and I don't see her on the 1880 census. So I'm beginning to believe that that story could be correct. And I was just wondering if it's worth trying to chase down a 1% Indigenous Americas match, given the family history.
Yeah, well, considering that she's like so far, you know what I mean? Like she's 97%, and then she's got this like small percentage. To me, that to me is more like something I would chase versus mine, where it's like a whole bunch of different ones. The other thing that I would be looking at is, are you searching through her matches for people who are Latinx or Mexican?
And I am seeing a lot of that.
Right. So then that means that you need to dive in head first into Mexican genealogy.
Okay. Thank you.
Which again, if you know anything about that, anybody colonized by Spain or Catholic records, you are getting mother's maiden names staying with people pretty much their entire lives. It is much easier to research because people keep their mother's maiden name.
Well, I guess I know what I will be doing in Utah.
Oh,
Thank you.
listen, hey, Nights and Weekends Killer, that's my name.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Delbra.
I thank you. I just had feedback, some things that I've observed. So one is if so I manage my brother's DNA and ancestry, I have permission for that, and maybe a few others. So when they're looking at their DNA, they may see 10 results, but when I look at their DNA, I see 3. So I don't know if that's by design or if that was purposed, but there just isn't a consistency between what they see and what I see when I get to manage their DNA.
Okay, wait, say that one more time.
As an example, so if I'm managing someone's DNA, if they look at their DNA match results, they see 10. When I look at their match results, I see 3. So I do not see every match result that they see.
So I'm wondering if there's something funky going on with your account, or if the other folks that you have shared with have access to Pro Tools and you don't.
So you're believing that's the case. I can see that. It was just me trying to understand what is the discrepancy between what they see and what I see. But that's good if
Right.
that
It could
could be the
be,
case.
yeah, it could be that they have access to Pro Tools and you don't.
Okay, so that's good to note. The only question I had is, so let's say, for instance, I'm looking at my matches. I search for a name, let's say Smith, and I search for that. Then I changed it to Jones and I hit search. I see no results. I literally have to reset the search function, type in Jones to see all of the matches. So that's just looking like a glitch to me.
Mm-hmm.
That should be looked at, because we shouldn't have to reset every time we're trying to do a multi search in the same context. So I just wanted to be able to raise that to someone, but that was it.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
All right, Nika, do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
So Iris Grant asked in the chat, how many matches are we missing due to the Timber algorithm? And is there any chance of that being changed in the future? Also, will they give us a chromosome browser?
Well, Shannon, people have been asking for a chromosome browser since, I don't know, since
2012.
1776, right? I'm like, for a very long time. I can pass the feedback to the team that works on it. In terms of the algorithm, changes and shifts are happening all the time based off of what we're defining in terms of just whether it's matches, whether it's algorithm, whether it's your admixture percentage. And so I would just stay tuned. I remember a few years back when we raised like the lowest matches, and people didn't want those to be removed. I remember that happening. Stuff is shifting all the time. So what I can do, again, because I don't work on that aspect of the product, is I can take your feedback back to the team and tell them that I'm hearing this from people. I cannot change the world as much as people think that I can. I cannot do everything. One thing I cannot do is knit. Cannot crochet. Can't do it, but I can sew. So I will do the things that I have within my power. Again, just like with Jerome, what he asked for, I can ask the team to incorporate those things, just like with what Delbert said. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your Saturday with me. I've got to run, but feel free to dive in. You can't break it. That's one of the things that I constantly tell people is just go in and start looking. Have a great day.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a great one. All right. All right, we have yet another presentation from Living DNA. We've got Martin and Gerard. Are you both here?
Yes, we are. I think we are, yeah.
Thank you ever so much. I know it must be so late where you are, if you are in England right now or somewhere else in the United Kingdom.
It's 6 p.m., but it's okay. It's been a lovely sunny day today, so it's been good.
It
Oh,
hasn't
wonderful. Almost time for dinner.
Right.
All right.
I'm gonna share. our slides. Can you see them? Yes, I can.
Yes,
Well,
we
well,
can.
yeah. Okay, so Gerard and I are going to do like a hybrid, both doing it, but not quite at the same time presentation, because we have different kind of expertise within the company in terms of like our roles and what we do. So I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Martin Blythe. I'm a senior bioinformatician within Living DNA. I've been with the company a long time, since its launch, I think back in 2016. So I've seen lots of development and so on and so forth with Living DNA. Gerard, I'm going to not introduce you. I'll let you do it yourself.
Thank you, Martin. So I've been at Living DNA for nearly 6 years now. I think I am a population geneticist, and I've been working on panel building, and that's mostly what I've been doing during my time at the company.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to present the first bit of the presentation. We're going to skip over some of the slides that are less relevant because Shannon did such an amazing intro on DNA and DNA matching. So I thought no need to reiterate that. But quickly, this is an overview roughly of our products that we sell at Living DNA. We're most known for our autosomal ancestry test, and our kit is a 3-in-1 DNA test, so it tests autosomal ancestry as well as Y-DNA and mtDNA. And we also provide a free matching service as well, so anyone with any data from anywhere can basically upload and get their match data for free. Ancestry method and autosomal ancestry is you get a basic breakdown from the upload, but if you want the detailed breakdown, which we're going to go into in a minute, that's a paid on extra. Next slide.
Wait,
Yeah.
hey, are you having fun with me? Are you having fun with me?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Is my sound okay?
Yes, someone was just having a lot of fun. That's all.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Yeah, just quickly, our kit is a swab-based DNA test. It is not a spit test. It's not a blood test, anything like that. I'm sure you're all kind of familiar with this sort of technology. You can essentially mail order the kit. We sell them all around the world. We use a Thermo Fisher based chip that is completely custom for our use, and we test over 750 mark SNPs on autosomal chromosomes. That's chromosomes 1 through 22. We test about 15,000 on X. We test over 20,000 on the Y chromosome, and we test about 6,000 on the mitochondria. And essentially, that's what we use to derive matching data around all ancestry methods. It's tuned towards ancestry as opposed to anything to do with health or that sort of thing. Next slide. So Shannon kind of already covered this part, but my preferred way of describing chromosomes is if you imagine your whole genome is a giant book, then your chromosomes are like chapters. Chapter 1 is the longest chapter, that's chromosome 1, and the shortest chapter is chromosome 22. And then you've got chromosome X and Y, and X and Y is very small. Next slide. Yeah, moving on. Yep, skip this one. I think we know what this means. Yeah, so just to show you how small and tiny the Y chromosome actually is against the X, this is roughly the approximate sizes of chromosomes during cell division. So as you can see, Y is much significantly smaller than the X chromosome. It only encodes a handful of genes which infer sexual the sex of an individual by essentially silencing other genes. So that's interesting little bit of biology to know.
Right, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of our method that we use for autosomal DNA analysis. So we base our methods in panels, meaning that we have different sets of individual data grouped in populations. That's panels that's what panels are. They are sets of reference individual DNA data, which we have clustered into separate populations using genetic clustering tools. Only they are the tools we use are based on haplotype-based methods, and we have at the minute 4 different panels, which you can see here. Some of them are nested within each other, like the British and Irish panel nested into Europe, or the Africa panel nested into the world panel. So the flow is that every sample is tested against the world panel, then depending on the results of each panel, it gets further tested in one of the smaller panels. This here is the main study in which our methodology is based on it. This is a study from 2015, and it was done by using this chroma painter and line structure methods, which basically are they are haplotype-based methods, and as you can see on this slide, the resolution and the correlation between genetic diversity is much better when using haplotype-based methods. The ones they provide the result on the left, the map on the left, compared to the ones on the right, which everything is more jumbled up. But yeah, so that's what these methods are. They provide a much better resolution, and especially when dealing with local variation and diversity at smaller levels. So this is actually our British and Irish panel, which is similar to the image you just saw. We just improved it a little bit, especially in the southern part of England, which is a bit more homogeneous than the rest of the country. And this one here is the Africa panel, which is the last full panel that we've released. We've got 72 ancestry regions at the minute. And to build this panel, we used data coming from 2 different sources. One of them is academic studies of African populations, as well as our own customer data. So in the latter, we used individuals that opted into Living DNA research program and met our selection criteria of having 4 grandparents born within a specified region. So that's how we made this panel. Then there's also the thing of deciding population boundaries and how to determine the shapes of the different regions and populations. And we carried out some research to investigate where each population originated historically. As we know, things have changed a lot during time. We've taken into account migratory paths that they might have done to reach their present locations. And then this information was correlated with detailed maps of the area, and corresponding borders were drawn. And as if you could see a bit, if you could zoom in the map, you can see that most of these regions don't really correlate to current countries or current political borders, and that's obviously because history has been complicated and doesn't correlate with the current political borders and boundaries across between different nations. Now, once we've got the panels built, this is like a brief overview of what each sample goes through. The process from the beginning, when the lab gets the sample, then there's some quality control, phasing and imputation. This is after extracting the sample, obviously, and genotyping it with microarray technology. Then we exclude related samples from the panels, if any, because related samples distort how samples compare to the panel. Then we run the chromosome painting algorithm for each panel that applies, as I said before. And each customer's chromosomes are painted using using the members of the reference panel as donors. After that, we run an admixture analysis for each panel, meaning that we process the chromosome painting output to ultimately convert it to percentage estimates. And finally, after all these previous steps have been done, we perform this final step called normalization, in which we combine the estimates for all panels to get the final ancestry breakdown. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail for these steps. I'll try not to be too boring. So the first one is phasing and imputation. Phasing is basically deciding which bits, which chunks of DNA, which strand comes from your father, which one comes from your mother, because obviously the technology we have doesn't say that. We don't know, so we have to estimate it using statistical methods. That's what phasing is. Once phasing is done, we do imputation. Imputation is basically, it has two different purposes. One of them is to extract the most detailed information from each customer's data, and also we do it in order to be able to compare data coming from different chips, because as you might know, we allow uploads from basically any other companies, testing companies. So different companies use different chips. So in order to be able to compare the data coming from different chips, we have to do imputation, in which what we do is have what we call imputation panel, which is a set of SNPs much larger than the original ones that we use in our chip, and it also uses SNPs that are used in by some other companies in their chips. So it's like a combination, and we end up with with the imputed data, which is quite bigger than the original SNP set that we have. Once we've imputed the data, we go through to chromosome painting. This is the step in which customers' chromosomes are painted using the members of the reference panels as donors. So what this means is basically for each part of your genome, there is a genealogy called the local genealogy, meaning that each bit of each chromosome has been inherited from a specific ancestor. Not all of them come from the same ancestor. And the purpose of the painting is to identify which member of the panel, of the donor panel, is closest to the ancestor from which each chromosome chunk comes from. So the identity of this nearest neighbor panel member changes along the chromosome. So at the end, what chromosome painting gives you is a set of lengths and boundaries. So it says from here to here, this chunk, this DNA chunk comes from this specific member of a panel. This is the closest relative to this chunk of the chromosome, and so on and so forth, until we have all the genome is broken down into small DNA fragments, and we have the local genealogy for all of them. For that, we use this chromosome painting method, which is based on a hidden Markov model to estimate all this data. After chromosome painting, we need to convert basically the output of this method into a percentage estimates, and this is quite it is a complex method. I'm not going to go deeply into it, but excuse me, but we need three things. One is obviously the output of the previous step, and then there's also the reference panel data again, because the co-ancestry matrix, the co-ancestry matrix for the donor individuals, as well as the labels and the group assignments for all target and donor individuals. So we combine the data from the target individual, the customer data, and the donor data, and also the number of expected donors. So we have a couple of years ago, we introduced a new admixture method, and what we do at the minute is combining two different approaches. One is non-list non-negative least squares, and the other one is based on Markov chain Monte Carlo Tropoulos-Hastings algorithms. We combine the two methods and we perform this analysis. We do 200,000 iterations. We sample it we repeat each part 10 times, and then at the end we get a consensus. So at the end of the day, what this means is that combining these two methods allows us basically to do two things. One is to have more accurate estimates, and also to reduce what might be background noise, because the combination of these two algorithms, especially the new MC method that we use, works as a compensation for regions for which we don't have enough samples, and allows us to improve our estimates. So as I'm sure you already know, this is what the final results look like. It's basically a list of the populations and the percentage of ancestry coming from each of them, together with the descriptions of the genetic history of each group, etc., etc. Back to you, Martin.
Oh, thank you very much, Gerard. That was really cool. Yeah, so I'll just add a comment from more of a layman's person, that is that we throw a lot of computational power at our autosomal ancestry method in order to derive really good estimates in terms of population regions. Gerard actually wrote his PhD thesis on the population structure of Africa, so he kind of doesn't tell anyone about that, but he really knows what he's talking about. Yeah, so all of our population regions, we've done literature and reviews and searches into these regions, and essentially provide quite a lot of background information about the people from those regions. Anyway, what I decided to do for this presentation was see if I could provide to you something a bit more bespoke, a bit more interesting to the viewers of today. So what I did was I looked around on for the GU272 associated surnames on your website, and I compiled a list of surnames that seem to be of interest to you. And basically this is sort of a preliminary kind of analysis of the data that we have within living DNA and how it might be useful to you. And it's kind of just generally interesting. I thought it was interesting anyway. Next slide, please, Gerard. So what I did was I mined our data system for US users that had one of the 98 surnames listed by your association. And then I looked at, of those, how many had African ancestry of a measurable amount. Essentially did a histogram of that data, and essentially I selected a relatively low threshold just to include as many people as possible, really. So it's about 1,300 people that have more than 20% African ancestry and are from the US. And then essentially looked at, which surnames seem to be the most predominant out of our data set. So of the 98, I think only about, and not all of them obviously have matches. So essentially I think it's like 38 names within our system. Would also point out at this point that the majority of these users are all matched, or all opted into our matching service. So by uploading your DNA data or by taking a kit test with us, you can match to them for free and essentially be part of our matching service. So diving into this data a little bit more detail, this is kind of just interesting in terms of surnames, but then I sort of wanted to look at what the African ancestry was of these people as a whole. Next slide. So essentially, by looking at what population groups seem to be common or more prevalent within this data set of 1,300 users, we see a particular pattern associated around the west of Africa. But I also analyzed the amount of ancestry in terms of like the skew from one individual to the other. The order is approximate. I haven't shown those results, but the order is approximately the same, but the variance is quite noticeable. But again, you know, this is a feature perhaps of like when you've got less than 50% African ancestry. Next slide, please. So putting all this together, this is just a small shot of all the population groups that we cover in West Africa. And as you can see, like Yoruba, Asan, and Dika, they are all the ones that you would necessarily associate with African American ancestry. Again, I'm not an expert by any means on the composition of African ancestry, but essentially there is a pattern to be seen here. And our method, I think, gives our users really detailed and very precise ability to attribute their ancestry to these individual regions. I just thought that was kind of cool and interesting. So yeah, this is just to point out that each of our population clusters that we have defined are annotated, and we've gone into detail to describe the people there, their origins, and so on and so forth. Just sort of providing a more kind of a humanistic link to your ancestry, I guess. The one other thing that wasn't actually mentioned on the first slide, but is actually quite popular with our users, is the ability to buy a printed book of your results. So, and this is actually quite popular with a lot of our users, and that is that you can do your ancestry test with us. You can get all essentially the information that you see on the website is reformatted and built into a hardback book that you can order off our site. Thanks, Gerard. Next one. So as I said at the beginning, we also test Y and MT SNPs in our data, and we give a pretty good breakdown of your haplogroups within MT and Y. No really need to go into great detail on this slide here. So essentially, with your MT and Y results, you will get a regional breakdown in terms of like where your haplogroup can be found most predominantly, as well as a migration map to show its origin and how it has spread over time from Africa and out across the world. And I kind of pulled that data into this analysis of GU272 surnames, and just wanted to see what we would find in terms of user data. So obviously Y chromosomes is probably going to be a little bit more interesting in terms of surnames. And essentially it falls into two general groups, which is the E groups and the non-E groups. The majority of the data is under the E haplogroup lineage. It's quite interesting. And essentially, when if you have tested our DNA, if you tested your DNA with living DNA, you can share your Y results and also your regional breakdown results from your autosomes with your matches if you so choose. And this is just essentially the same idea with mitochondria, which was to look at what haplogroups seem to be predominantly within the group of people, and essentially it's mostly L's, but obviously there are some other lineages. So H is obviously more European. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So our matching service, it matches out to fourth degree, so fourth cousin. It's totally free. There's no subscriptions. What you get is the same for everyone in terms of functionality. We do have a chromosome browser. We do have a messaging service. You are able to share some of your data. You don't have to use your real name. Obviously, you can use a pseudonym of your choosing. We take a great deal of time, and obviously with GDPR regulations, we really want to dig into like making sure that we can protect our users as best we can. You can opt in and out of matching at any time. You can also request data deletion, which means we will scrub your data from the system in its entirety. There's no going back from that. So hopefully you downloaded it before you did that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think I just kind of covered all of these bits. Next one. Yeah, and this is essentially just showing you how far out that our matching service is. Yeah, I don't think in comparison to other DNA testing companies, I don't think we're setting any new records here, but obviously it is a functional matching service that allows you to use multiple chip types accurately to provide your matching list. And we're currently working on additional features that we hope will certainly aid in our users in their genealogy search. And that's essentially it. Gerard, do you have anything else you'd like to add at the end?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, but yeah.
All right. Thank you both for this fantastic presentation. I would ask that the audience jot down their questions as we move to the next presenter, and following our next presenter, Sherman, Family Tree DNA, we will have our question and answer session for all of the remaining speakers here today. So once again, thank you so much, Gerard and Martin. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, absolutely. We are so honored to have you here today. So
we did have one question there, I think, from Jerome. Can I answer that one quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, so question for the end. Oh, it's question for the end. Oh, sorry, I didn't read that part. How lazy of me. Would you characterize your computation methods as being dramatically different from other major testing companies? In my experience, across all of the testing companies, my results outputs have proven to be remarkably similar. Yeah, I can't speak for other companies, but I can say that if you're not using a haplogroup, so basically like not SNPs like AA or AT, you have to take blocks of DNA data that are phased to either one, because you've got 2 copies of every chromosome. So you kind of have to assign all of your SNPs to 1 copy of your chromosome. That's what phasing does. If you're not analyzing haplogroups, you will getting like below 5% estimations is going to be really tricky. So that's all I would want to say about that.
Thank you so much. Right, now we will have Sherman McCrae of Family Tree DNA.
Hi, my name is Sherman. I work for Family Tree DNA. And today I'll be giving a presentation on decoding your DNA, just making the most of autosomal Y and mtDNA. Just give me one moment and we can get started. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. So my name is Sherman McCrae. I work with Family Tree DNA. I started out in the research and I started out in customer service, maybe like 2018. I think I worked there for like a year, and then I moved over into the groups department, was still an extension of customer service, but we dealt mostly with like group project administrators and assisting them in their research projects. And maybe like a year or so ago, I started working more with the research and development department. So I work on different DNA or different projects within the department. I did a lot of work with our Y-DNA Discover. I tested a lot of people and I did research. I tested Muhammad Ali's brother to add Muhammad Ali to the project. And we also did a presentation it was like the summer, like the Juneteenth for Roots Tech. That presentation was really about you know, they thought that they descended from Senator Clay, and we kind of discussed that. In the end, they were not descended from Senator Clay. They descended from another European man. So those are some of the things that I work on right now. I'm testing some people in the Cameroon. I'm looking to find some more ancient AOO Y-DNA samples. So we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about family tree DNA. Sorry about that. What did I do? Did I miss my screen up? Oh, so a little bit about family tree DNA. It was started in 2000 by genealogists, and it's based in Houston. Oh, 1 second. I'm using another computer. I'm at work, and they have their mouse pad just all jumbled, so I apologize about that. So yeah, it was started in 2000, based in Houston. It's the only company that offers a full suite of Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and autosomal. So we do all 3 types of DNA testing there. So we're actually the only company to have their own lab. We do testing for some other companies. And so that's another benefit. And so we're actually the only company that stores samples for additional customers. Quite often, we store DNA samples for like up to 20, 25 years. So quite often, we'll have a relative of someone who's deceased. They may contact us or give us a call to see if we have a sample available. And we'll pull that sample and test it if that's what they want us to do. So we've had a good amount of success doing that. And so that's another benefit of the company. And so we're the only company with group projects to help advance research. We have over like 10,000 research projects. And so that's actually another benefit. And we have no subscriptions. So all of our, so you pay for testing and everything else. You just have access to everything else, your matches, access to group projects, etc. So in this presentation, we'll kind of talk about why you should take a DNA test, what DNA testing can and can't do, and we'll discuss what types of tests there are and who you should test. First, we'll start off with some limitations on DNA testing. Of course, it can't provide you with an instant family tree. It won't qualify you to register for a Native American tribe either. And it can't tell you what tribe you're from, although we can detect Native American segments. And so there's 3 types of tests for genetic genealogy. You have the Family Finder, which is an autosomal test, and that looks at the DNA inherited from both sides of the family. That DNA is broken down and randomly recombined. So and so you have an ethnicity estimate and you have matches. And so it's actually best to test as many people as possible because you have some relatives who might share more DNA with other people than with some other matches than others. So by testing as many people as possible, you know, it starts to paint a clearer picture of how you're related to your other DNA matches. So if you look to the right side, where that's the mtDNA, which is inherited, you know, mother, mother, mother. And on the left side in blue, that's Y-DNA. So we test the Y chromosome, we test the autosomal DNA in the middle, and the mtDNA. And so just kind of determining which test is right for you, we'll first talk about autosomal DNA. And so with autosomal DNA or the Family Finder, both men and women can take that test. Autosomal DNA traces all your ancestral lines and provides a percentage breakdown of the regions from the world from which your ancestors came. It also will provide a list of matches who share common ancestors from you from any of your ancestral lines within the past 5 generations. You can actually go back a bit further as well. And so it also is, you know, it's a random recombination combines that inherited DNA. And so another question we always have about ethnicity estimates, since that's like a large component of why people might even take autosomal DNA tests to kind of see what their ethnicity estimate is. And so ethnicity estimates uses reference populations that are representative of world populations. And it also matches you to the closest reference. And it could also be beyond 5 to 6 generations. And also it's important to note that nationality is not an ethnicity. Ethnicity estimates change from time to time, and that's like a huge debate when it does happen. I always see, people who are happy that they got the results they wanted, and you see the polar opposite as well. But I'm just kind of even keel at this point in time. I understand that, it's science, and science does change over the course of time, and so you can get some good information from your ethnicity estimates, but it's not like an end-all be-all as well. So ethnicity estimates can change because of updates in reference populations. They could add new populations and refine existing ones. They can have an update in their algorithm or even change the entire program. And when that happens, when they update the entire program, that might change the reference populations as well. And also the algorithm. Also, if a company switches up their chip that they were using, that could also cause a change to ethnicity estimates as well. So it's also important to keep many of these things in mind, that, when a company does make some changes, there's a good likelihood that you're going to have some different ethnic ancestry reference populations as well. So this is my origin. So this is how the layout for family tree DNA looks. My family is Gullah for the most part. My dad's side, they're from South Carolina, around Clarendon County, South Carolina, Sumter, etc. And so he's pretty Gullah, and so he carries a high Guinea. Actually, is this mine? Oh, actually, I apologize. This is my results. And so yeah, my family is Gullah, and so I carry a lot of DNA from like Liberia and Sierra Leone as a result. And so this is kind of the breakdown right here from a family tree DNA perspective of my DNA. And this is a comparison of my DNA test from 23andMe, which is on the far left. Family tree DNA is in the middle, and then you have the ancestry on the right. So the ancestry, we call that Mali or whatnot, but it's all representative of that same area. Next, we'll talk about mtDNA. So with mtDNA, it has 16,569 base pairs. And with the mtDNA, you have what they call hypervariable regions there. You have HVR1 and HVR2. So in essence, if you take a DNA test and you have matches, you may see matches at the HVR1 level. They're really far back. They can be 10, 20,000 years ago sometimes. HVR2 matches are typically a bit closer, but they can still be outside of genealogical times as well. But with the coding region, that's the part of the mitochondria that contains the genes. So you could actually find some really close cousins from the maternal line, or you could find somebody as far back as 400 or 500 years where you share a common ancestor and there just hadn't been any mutations along the mitochondria. So that kind of gets tricky at times, just trying to figuring out how you relate it to some of your matches, because theoretically you could have a tester sister who's a perfect match, and you could have another random match there as well who's a perfect match. And then you may come to find out that person could be related to you 500 years ago or more, and there's just no mutations. So with mtDNA, both men and women can take that test. So it traces the direct maternal line. You think mother, 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 mother. So with mtDNA provides a list of matches who share a common direct maternal ancestry within 52 generations. So I think we count 25 years as a generation, so it goes back pretty far. mtDNA also provides an ancestral migration route stretching back thousands of years, which is revealed by your haplogroup. And so this is, and so I do a lot of target testing. And so I use Ancestry a lot for that, where I'll recruit some matches who may descend from a certain line. So if I meet someone who descends from my second or third great grandfather or grandmother and they're a direct descendant, then I'll try to get them to do a more advanced test like Y-DNA and mtDNA. So this is just an example of me testing a cousin just to kind of get a line on my grandfather's, my maternal grandfather's mother. So her maternal haplogroup, if you look to the right, is L1B2A. Sometimes you can get some really good information from that genetic signature like that. Like, for example, if I see haplogroup L1C, then I know that that person is probably from the Cameroon because haplogroup L1C is considered a pygmy clade. And so you are able to get certain information from haplogroups. If I see a Native American haplogroup, et cetera. And so this is, I was actually surprised. I wasn't expecting us to get any matches on a coding region. And so I was thoroughly surprised at like the bottom match right here. I started looking through my family finder and she actually shows up on my family finder match as well. So she's a match on a coding region and she shows up on a family finder. So that's a good indication that our connection is within genealogical time. So this is like a case that I'm still working on, but it appears that we descend from an African woman probably in the 1700s of some sort. And so this is just a case that I'm still working on, but I wanted to use that as an example. So this is actually a layout of our new haplotree. mtDNA tree. So we are releasing our new mtDNA tree during Roots Tech. So I was able to log in and grab a few screenshots, but I wanted to show this example of showing how when enough people start to test, that your haplogroup will start to refine down to your common ancestor. So this is actually an African clade right here, L2A1C7A, but their relative left Africa a long time ago and went into this country. And so I actually wanted to show this just to show that with enough people testing, it shows that their common ancestor was born in 1920. And so I wanted to use that as an example to show that, you know, theoretically, I know some of you are descended from the GU272. So, you know, if you guys are descended from a certain woman, if you can recruit enough people to test, you'll be able to refine your matches and your haplogroup down to something similar like this. And so this is how if you taking the mtDNA or thinking about it, after Roots Tech, once this is revealed, your layout will look more like this. It's important to note that mtDNA does not give you an ethnic percentage because you can't get, you're only looking at one line of your ancestors, your direct maternal ancestor, mother. So you cannot get a ethnic percentage like you can from autosomal from mtDNA. So just keep that in mind. But it does, however, it gives you a haplogroup. And we'll talk about haplogroup. So these are my Y-DNA haplogroup, EFTC 600, and LTC was my mtDNA haplogroup, which actually changed with the new iteration of the mito tree. So haplogroup are groups of genetically similar people who are assigned labels that represent their place on the Y-DNA or mtDNA organizational tree. And haplogroups can also correspond with migratory patterns as well. So sometimes you are able to pick up information with that. So we'll look at Y-DNA briefly next. And with Y-DNA, only men could take Y-DNA. Remember, we're looking at the father side. So Y-DNA, father. So it essentially traces your direct paternal line. And it also will provide you with a list of matches who also share a common direct paternal ancestry. Y-DNA also provides an ancestral route. Once again, your genetic signature or your haplogroup of your direct paternal line. So there are two types of Y-DNA tests. The first one is kind of older. They're called STR tests, which stands for short-term repeat. And so Family Tree DNA has them, and UCell 37, 67, and Y111 marker tests. And so those tests are used for matching to individuals. And so they've been around for a while. And so the other type of tests are probably a bit more newer, but still been around for a few years, and they're called SNP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism. And so with SNP testing, you can start to refine your subclade. So if you've only done a Y-DNA, let's say you do a Y111, you'll get matches up to that point on 111 markers, but your haplogroup say if it's EM2, it's going to stay EM2. But when you get into SNP testing, because we're starting to test the unique points of DNA, your haplogroup starts to change and become more refined and closer in time. So therefore, SNPs also seem to be a bit more reliable, which I'll talk about. And so this is what STRs look like. And so you're looking at markers right here, DS 393, and so you see the value below, that's the number of repeats. So if you look at like DYS 19, you have some stars there. Those are markers that have the propensity to mutate, fast mutating markers, because those numbers, like you see 14 there, it has to change. But this can actually cause some issues. So let's say you're just looking at this first panel of 12 markers. And so let's say 389 mutated fast or whatnot. So that 28 changed to a 31. And then somebody else might have tested, it changed to 35, etc. But ultimately it came back to a 28. So this is called marker convergence. And so it actually makes someone more distantly related appear more closer. And so this is the issue that we have with, let's say, a DNA testing company that can predict or tell somebody their tribe. So they might only be looking at 8 or 9 markers on the first panel. And so theoretically, we know, because we sell Y-DNA 12 tests, so we already know that some of my 12 marker matches are related to me 3,000 years ago. And they could be related to you as far back as 20,000 years ago. So it's actually impossible to predict a tribe from only looking at 8 or 9 markers, because you're not factoring in marker convergence, the fact that those numbers at the bottom, they have to change over the course of time, but ultimately they're gonna that 12 is gonna show back up as a 12 again. And so that's why, when you're looking at a small small data set, and you're trying to make something, and you're trying to predict something like a tribe based off of markers, is like grossly inaccurate, because you're not really looking at enough data, and you're not factoring in like things like marker convergence and things like that. Ultimately, like if you do a Y111 test, it could affect you. Fast mutating markers could also affect you in the sense that it can cause a genetic distance. And so that's the number of markers that you don't match. And so it could essentially make someone appear more distantly related than what they really are if those markers start mutating. And so the way to kind of rectify that or rein that in a little bit is by doing SNP testing, like the big Y. There's other advanced SNP testing out there, like whole genome sequencing, etc. But for a lot of that, you don't really have any place to go to get matches. You may have like one site to go to like a third-party site where people who've done like a whole genome sequencing or this type of test can go and see how they match other people. But the Big Y test is an advanced exploratory test that sequences millions of locations on the non-recombining portion of the Y chromosome to reveal both known and private variants. So those are essentially mutations. I'll go back. So essentially when you test, you have known variants that you're going to share with other people, but you'll also have what they call your private variants. And so essentially what happens is those private variants will sit there until someone else comes along and tests positive for some of your private variants, and then they become public. And so this is how the tree starts to grow, by someone, another tester coming along that tests positive for your private variants. Then you start to create new branches on the haplotree. So this is what Y-DNA matches look like on the family tree DNA database. So I tested my mother's brother, so my uncle. I did a big Y test, mainly, I wanted to know our haplogroup so I can get some more information on our origins. So I know a EM96 is a haplogroup that was born around East Africa, probably around the Sudan. So that gave me some information right there, that we wasn't on the same branch as most African Americans who are EM2 descendants, which is much younger than a EM96. And so if you look at like my second match, you'll see a more defined haplogroups. That means my first match hasn't done a big Y, but my second match and a couple more, they've done some more extensive SNP testing called big Y. So that EM96 is now further downstream and closer in time, and it changed to EBY 100 134. Theoretically, if I tested my cousin up top, we're going to create our own branch because we share a common ancestor, Alex Smith, that was born in 1800. I think the rest of my matches, our common ancestor is a bit further back. And so my first match, for example, just to show different ways you could use Y-DNA, I met him on Ancestry. My grandfather has 3 Smith lines, and I noticed he had one. So we were just trying to figure out where this all fits in at. And so he did a Y-DNA test. I tested my uncle, and he comes back as with a genetic distance of 1. And so that essentially means that out of 111 markers that were examined, we match on 110. So that was a really good match right there. And this is how the layout looks with the rest of the testers who've done with the rest of the people on my branch who've done big Y testing. So EBY 100 134, we looks like we share a common ancestor born right before 1400. This date actually got pushed back. I think another big Y test came in, and so they had to do some recalculation. So they had to put our time, the most common ancestor, back. I was really hoping when I upgraded the guy who has the feather, he descends from a free person of color named Abraham Freeman. He was born in North Carolina in like the 1700s, and I'm from North Carolina as well. So I was really hoping when he showed up on my Y-DNA match list that, we would have a closer connection. But when I upgraded him to Big Y 700, it kind of showed that our common ancestors definitely was when they were still in Africa or whatnot. And so pretty interesting overall. Next, we'll talk about autosomal tools. So we do have like matches, and we have some other things there, but in terms of like tools that I use quite more often is for genealogy research. The first one would be the chromosome painter. And this is what you're looking at here. So the chromosome painter is Family Tree DNA's visual tool that shows you how your autosomal DNA is segmented across your 22 chromosomes. It displays your inherited DNA segment using different colors to represent different ancestral populations or geographical regions. And so this tool essentially creates a personalized map of your genetic ancestry painted across each chromosome pair. So this is pretty useful as well. And another really useful tool that that we recommend you use is also the chromosome painter. And so the chromosome painter can be really, really useful once you learn how to use it. So I encourage you guys to watch some videos and just learn how to do triangulation, because it can really help you out in advancing your research and figuring out how you're connected to people. But the chromosome browser is a visualization tool that allows you to compare your DNA segments with those of your matches. So you can compare up to 7 matches at once, with each match's shared segments displayed in different colors across your 22 autosomal chromosome. This visual representation helps you see exactly where you share DNA with your matches, and you can look and see where their overlap is as well. So one of the browser's key features is the ability to show detailed segment data, including the exact start and end positions of shared segments, their size and centimorgans, and a number of matched SNPs as well. So this precise information is crucial for determining potential genealogical relationships with your matches. So this is something else that great tool that autosomal tool that we use, that I use pretty often when I'm just trying to do research. And this is the segment data. This is, I think, with me and my dad. And so I just showed that as an example where you can download these segments, but it actually shows our start. Like on chromosome 1, it shows where we start, our start location and our end location, and the amount of DNA we share, 274 centimorgans on chromosome 1. So something like this is something else you can utilize to figure out how you're related to your matches. Next, we'll talk about the Million Mito Project. which is what we're going to release, the new iteration of the mito tree during Roots Tech in a couple of weeks. And so just like our Y-DNA Discover, the Million Mito Project has amassed thousands of mito genomes from hundreds of studies of present-day individuals around the world, including many populations from regions that are otherwise underrepresented in commercial DNA databases. We have ancient DNA samples, where we have thousands of DNA samples spanning thousands of years and from different parts of the world. We also have notable connections as well. So that's something I added a lot more notable connections for Y-DNA. So I'll probably pick up on the mtDNA side. I think I added like Whitney Houston and a few other people a couple weeks ago that'll probably show up on a new iteration. And so we also have group projects. And so that's a really useful tool that our company offers, because some of those group projects are ran by, you know, really thorough researchers. I know Shannon, he's really thorough. He has a group project as well. I was taking a look at that last night. And so group projects are ran by citizen science research performed by volunteers for hundreds of different mtDNA projects, each specializing in research of different haplogroups, lineages, and regions around the world. So some advantages of doing an MT full sequence is, you know, of course, you get your time back to Eve, but you also get recent history up to genealogical times. And I'll show you an example shortly of, I showed one earlier where when enough people start to test, your haplo, or where your branch and your haplogroup is just going to be refined and closer in time. So so you also be able to refine your haplogroup, just like my haplogroup changed from L2C. And with the new iteration, I'm a bit further downstream. You also have access to the tree, our mito tree, which will grow. So as more people start to test, new branches will be formed, and haplogroups will start to change. Like I said earlier, you'll see your notable connections. We're working on an updated migration map called a globe tracker for mtDNA, so they're going to release that at some point in time. Ancient connections, so we take papers, archaeological, academic studies. We'll analyze those papers and upload those findings into our database. So, you know, we've uploaded a lot of like genetic studies. We've worked with some researchers from like African American burial grounds, like Avery's Rest. I think that was in Delaware. We've also done some work with the researchers from the Sugarland 95 as well. I've contacted some potential descendants for Avery's Rest and Sugarland 95. So although we don't have those results, like the people from the Sugarland 95 on a tree, if one of you guys did a Y-DNA or mtDNA test and you came back matching one of the results from that project, we'll reach out to you directly and put you in touch with the researchers. So, you know, you guys can kind of work that out and talk and figure out where the connection is. So that's something else that we do. And lastly, you'll get your redefined ancestral path. And so this is the new iteration of the mtDNA. I'm pretty sure some of you have taken the mtDNA project, mtDNA test so far. And so my haplogroup is L2C. I think that's found largely in Senegambia region of West Africa. And so with that, this is screenshots from the new layout that'll be released. And so you will get your haplogroup story. And this kind of shows my haplogroup L2C, you know, comes from a woman that was born roughly 20,000 years ago. And it shows some descendant lineages as well. And if you look on the left, those are other tools that you would be able to utilize with the mtDNA. You'll be able to see the country, frequency, notable connections, migration map, your time tree. You'll also be able to see how you match other testers on the time tree as well. And then it also shows your ancestral path, etc. So with the new release, they reran my information, and so I got a new subclade now. So my haplogroup actually changed from L2C to L2C4, and now I descend from a woman born 12,000 years ago, as opposed to 20,000 years ago. So looking forward to the release of the new mtDNA project in the next couple of weeks, and just to see how get some really good see how the feedback is, and just to see how people like it, because I think our last update was based off of some really old data. So we've incorporated academic or samples from the Genome Project into this. And so we have a lot more mtDNA samples added into this new project. This is just another example. This is a Cape Verdean branch I found. And they descend from a woman born around 1770. But this just goes to show that if enough people start to test, your clade and your haplogroup is going to be refined down closer in time. And so we'll be able to you may receive a new subclade, may generate a new subclade, but also we'll be able to provide you with an estimate for the shared grandmother for everyone on this branch. So this is also an African branch as well, but since everybody's there, I'll just call it a Cape Verdean clade. Next, we'll look at Y-DNA tools that could possibly assist you in your genealogical research. So it'll be kind of similar to mtDNA. So let's say you do a big white test, you'll come back. So this is the test results from where I tested my uncle, where our common ancestor with the other matches were born in 1350. And so these are notable connections. So these are typically considered as fun facts. I added a lot of these people where I did the research or I tested them or whatnot. And so like Bill Pickett, I tested a direct descendant from his brother. Since they share the same Y-DNA haplogroup, I was able to use his genetic signature to add Bill Pickett as a notable connection on our website. And so this is essentially what I do. And so theoretically, if you were related to on the same branch as Bill Pickett, Hiram Revers, even the Mazingos, I added Darius Brown. I had quite a few people there. And so if you're related to them on the Y-DNA side, and you do a big Y, they'll show up as a match, and it'll give you a date for that. So that's another tool that I use sometimes. We also have an ancestral path. So people who are really interested to see how their SNPs mutated, you can see for this branch, we start at the bottom, EM96. And now we're in the more modern times. When you look at our clade EBY100-134, so that just kind of gives you a layout of how those mutations happened and the amount of time that passed between those mutations. We also have ancient connections as well on the site. And so these are typically results that have been taken from academic archaeological samples. And so we analyze the results and we add them to our tree. So I actually have an interesting story about my connection to Zimbu that I think I'll share shortly before I wrap up. And so in essence, if you take a Y-DNA test, you'll probably come back with some ancient connections. Well, you will come back with some, but the how close you are just depends or whatnot. And so these are all I think most of these were taken from academic and archaeological studies that we added into our database. Before I wrap up, I'll talk about some genealogical discoveries. So as I was mentioning, my paternal side is from South Carolina. They're really Gullah. And so this is my second great grandfather. As you can see at the bottom, he said his father's birthplace was from Africa. Because, looking at my family and all the people that I've tested, we have so many African matches. I think even between my grandmother and her sister and some other people, they share about 40, 50 African matches. And so I've always been kind of interested, like on the back burner, as a lot of researchers mind, like where in Africa is my family from? And so I got lucky. I got really lucky a few years back in being able to come get an answer to that question. So this is my second great grandfather. Nevertheless, he put his dad's birthplace with Africa. Also, I think his mom was from Africa as well, based off of DNA, autosomal DNA, to another family that descends. I'm pretty confident that his mother was also African. So this is the lady who I believe to be his mother. Her name was Satira Span, and you could see some information right there on her. She also listed her parents, that she was African and that her parents were African as well. And so a lot of my Span side of the family, we received loads of matches from Margaret Baxter's side of the family and her descendants. So it appears that Margaret is probably his sister, Isaac Span's sister, and these were their parents. And so I'd been researching the Span wills in South Carolina for years. They enslaved thousands of people between South Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. And so I wasn't having any luck, but just a random conversation with a close relative. And she let me know that as far as she was told, the Spans were enslaved by the Conyers. And so that actually rung a bell for me because my grandfather, Isaac Span, had two families. Of course, he married a woman named Rosina Dow, but he also, through DNA, I found that he had another family with a woman named Laura Connors. So that actually made sense once she told me that. So I just started looking through the Connors will. So I was really ecstatic when I ran across the will of Charles Connors. And, I see these names mentioned: Satira and her four children, Lizzie, Marianne, Isaac, and Margaret. And so that would be Margaret Baxter right there from the prior screen slide. And so that was a good preponderance of evidence that Satira would be Isaac's mother, Margaret would be his sister. He was up working, he was clearly, based off of DNA, had a family with someone also on that plantation, Laura. And so preponderance of evidence, definitely using records and DNA, maybe pinpointed that this to be his extended family. Also got lucky enough to find two more kids of Satira's as well, named Paris and Sharper. Of course, I think her date of birth is wrong. I think she was born probably closer to 1800, etc., as opposed to 1780. And so back in 2012, I think they were doing some renovations in Charleston, South Carolina, and they discovered a gravesite containing 36 bodies, and they called them the Anson Street Ancestors. And so they did DNA analysis on the bodies, and we got access to that paper and we uploaded it into our database. And lo and behold, I was attached to one of the men from the gravesite. His name was Zimbu. And so genetic analysis determined that he was probably lived between 1760 and 1790. And so he was one of the men, but he's actually my closest match. And so on my Y-DNA test, I have loads of matches from the Congo, but they're related to me 3,000 years ago. And so DNA degrades over the course of time. So we were able to get some snips from his profile, but I had our haplotree manager review the results, and he was pretty confident that if they had a more robust SNP profile from Zimbu, that he's pretty confident that we are related within the last 400 years, so that we would share a common ancestor within the last 400 years. And so Zimbu was probably from the Congo or Angola. And so this is a little excerpt saying that Zimbu was a man about 30 to 40 years old when he died, and his maternal DNA shows that his ancestors came from Central Africa. Isotope analysis of his teeth and bones showed that he was born in a rice coast or the Congo. He was captured, and so they also spoke about his teeth, that they were worn, and he had cavities, abscesses, tooth loss. And so, yeah, that was really some good information that I was able to gain. Just to match an academic sample from, not too far away in Charleston was really exciting for me, considering that, my second great grandfather put that his dad was African. Now I know the region or country that he came from. Next, I'll talk about another discovery. So we worked on building out George Washington's family tree. So here, this is a blog on our site. with an excerpt from a blog where Family Tree DNA collaborated with the Armed Forces DNA Laboratory. And so essentially they went to Harwood Cemetery where George Washington's brother lived, and they dug up some unmarked graves. And so their goal was to figure out who was in those unmarked graves right there. And so it says Colonel Samuel Washington, once the owner of Harwood Plantation, is best known for being the younger brother of the first president of the United States, George Washington. And of course, as far as we know, George Washington did not have any children of his own, so his Y-DNA signature couldn't be inferred from testing direct descendants, but we can go around and test other people, and that's how we were able to obtain George Washington's genetic signature. So this is a really good, cool project. And so, of course, we do Y-DNA testing. So this is actually Sam Walter Washington's family tree. And this is what we were building out. And so if you look to the right where you see Colonel Sam Washington, so these are the 3 bodies that they tested from that unmarked graves, and that was Dr. Sam Walter Washington, born in 1797, and his brother George Steptoe Washington, and then their mother, Lucy Payne. So those were the 3 bodies that were recovered from Harwood Cemetery, and they did massive genetic and so they did lots of genetic analysis on them, all types of testing, Y-DNA, mtDNA, autosomal, because there was like huge pedigree collapse because they were just so interrelated. If you start from the bottom and you look at Sam Walter Washington and you go to the Sam Walter Washington, born in 1853, you'll see that both of his parents were Washingtons. But his Y-DNA signature was through John Augustine Washington. And so while we was working on this project, you know, we had a few Washington DNA testers, but there was one that just stuck out like a sore thumb, a tester that someone had tested back in 2012 with the surname Mitchell. And so we were trying to figure out, like, why is this person with the surname Mitchell in with this George Washington clade? And so someone from our team reached out to the tester. I don't know if they emailed him or called him, but however, he wasn't interested. We would later find out that he was in hospice. So, but his sister contacted us. Her name's Mary Baker. She contacted us, and so she had us expedite a kit out. And so she was able to get him tested before he passed a few days later. And so we were waiting on his haplogroup to come back. And so when his big Y test came back, it came back with the haplogroup RFTE 191. So we already knew that, of course, this is George Washington's branch. We were able to, you know, get a signature based off of the archaeological testing over at Harwood Estate. And we had Samuel Walter Washington, who also tested with us as well. Now, of course, if you look at RFTG 792, someone else tested from that branch as well. And so this is Samuel Walter Washington at the bottom. So him and the other person, they share a common ancestor, born roughly around 1850 or so. But the person who we found with the surname Mitchell, he shares a common ancestor with Samuel Walter Washington, and the other person, they share someone born somewhere in the before 1750 or whatnot. And so, yeah, we reached out to them. And so we was really ecstatic once we start communicating with the Mitchells to learn that they were mulatto. So Mary Baker is actually, she's white. So it wasn't a surprise to her when she takes a test with Ancestry, etc. This is her family tree. It wasn't a surprise to her when she takes a test with Ancestry, etc., that she comes back with some African DNA, because she already knew that she come from free people of color, etc. And so like her, I think this is her grandfather, Albert Henry Mitchell. He successfully passed for a white. So I don't think he kind of took it to the grave. So she knew nothing about that, him passing. So once she started looking through records, she started to see like William Mitchell, etc. You know, they were listed as either black or mulatto, etc. And so that leads us to Joseph Mitchell right here. You know, he appears to be Well, he's definitely a mulatto offspring of what appears to be John Augustine Washington. So it appears that John Augustine Washington had some type of relationship with an enslaved woman, and Joseph is the son. And so this is a really huge find, because I know all of us, we've heard about, Washington's having kids with slaves. I've heard rumors out there where, George Washington supposedly have an illegitimate son. But as far as I know, this is the first confirmed case of where we've been able to confirm that, of a mulatto or black offspring from one of the Washingtons. And so we're able to determine this by big Y testing and looking at the family tree, just kind of seeing where they fit in. And so we tested Samuel Walter Washington. We also had the DNA from a couple more of his ancestors that we got from Harwood Estate. And so, but his Y DNA runs through John Augustine Washington. So therefore, this is actually where they connect at, through John Augustine Washington, born in 1789, died in 1832. So although our big Y tree has this branch at 1750 or so, it still fits within the confidence interval where this still is pretty applicable. And so, yeah, we actually discovered that John Augustine Washington is definitely the probable father of Joseph Mitchell, born in 1819, died in 1900. So we're actually still working on this project. We are trying to figure out who the enslaved woman was. We've had Paul Hennick look through some records. Up to this point, we've been unsuccessful. So right now, I'm just doing more target testing. I'm going through some of her matches at Ancestry, trying to encourage them to transfer over the family tree DNA, where I could use some more tools, and even potentially offer them a free mtDNA test so we can try to get the signature on the enslaved woman who's the mother of Joseph Mitchell. And so just to add, so this is actually a picture of a man named Jim Mitchell, because we believe that they came from that those slaves came from the Blakely plantation. And so this actually added more evidence. And so this says Jim Mitchell first appears in the surviving plantation records of John Augustine Washington III, the last private owner of Mount Vernon. He was listed as Jim Mitchell. So according to forced slave list from 1840s to 1850, Mitchell was born around 1795 and inherited by John Augustine by his father, who died in 1832. So he very likely came to Mount Vernon in the 1830s or 40s with other slaves from the Blakely, another plantation owned by the Washington family. And so once there, he labored in the fields. They knew from the state records that he was really ill in 1844. That's when 200 acres of estate were sold to Mount Vernon ladies. So that's another sentence, but it also says when 200 acres of estate were sold to Mount Vernon Ladies Association on the eve of the Civil War, John Augustine still had 1,000 acres on adjoining land where his slaves continued to live and work. And so, yeah, this picture and the information behind it actually provided a bit more preponderance of evidence. And so that's where we're looking now, just to try to get more information on the enslaved woman. We're trying to determine out her identity. And so in honor of the GU 272, Miss Mary Baker is also related to, she's a descendant of the GU 272. So someone mentioned earlier about the Mahoneys or the Mahans. So this is Daniel Mahoney and his wife Nancy Mahon, or paternal fourth great grandparents of GU 272 descendant Mary Beth Baker. Daniel was enslaved at White Marsh Plantation, while his wife was enslaved by the Carroll family. While descendants of Daniel's brother Harry were enslaved by the Jesuits and sold to plantations in Louisiana, Daniel and Nancy, they remained in Maryland. Lastly, before I wrap up, I'll just talk about what a group project is. Group projects are research projects that are led by volunteer administrators who have a personal interest in furthering their own research. They're typically free to join, so though some have prerequisites because of their scope. And so, as I mentioned earlier, administrators, some of them are some of the best researchers out there. Just depends on the project and their skill set. But reasons for joining a group project: you can share our research, both genetic and paper. You can compare data beyond simply just matching. You can learn the science behind the test. You can get recommendations and also recruit other testers. Just some more information on Family Tree. If you tested with another company, we do accept transfers. MyHeritage also accept transfers. And so with a transfer, if you're a male, if you tested with Ancestry or 23andMe, I know they give you your haplogroups, but if you tested with Ancestry, you could transfer over to Family Tree and we'll give you your haplogroup as well. And at some point, we're also going to give you guys empty DNA haplogroups badges as well for free. So in theory, if you test with Ancestry once again and you transfer over, you'll be able to get your haplogroup badges just like you do with 23andMe. If you are interested, if you transfer a kid over, you're interested in looking at our tools and looking at My Origins, that's just like a one-time fee of $19. Important things to note when you're trying to break down brick wall is considering testing other family members. The more known relationships you have, the easier it's going to be to triangulate. Siblings, cousins, etc. They're going to have matches that you probably don't have. And of course, you're contributing to the database and knowledge pool. And some relatives, you may be the person to break down someone else's brick wall. So I appreciate you guys today. I'm pretty accessible. If you guys have any extra questions or want to reach out to me, you can feel free to shoot me an email and I'll try to get back with you. I'll try to stay on for a bit to answer some questions, but I do have to get to work.
All right. Thank you ever so much for that splendid presentation. Very informative.
Thank you.
We will now move into the question and answer period for all of our speakers who are still with us today. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand at this time, and you are free to come off of the mute and off of the closed camera shutters, if you so wish. Did I see that Tony has raised her hand? Tony, you are muted.
Okay, I was just wondering, what type of projects do you have going on?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
You mean like my personal projects or
No, well, you said that's basically what the company does is project.
Well, we have group projects. So like Shannon has a group projects about like, for example, enslaved by the Jesuits. So we have DNA researchers who start group projects. So they're over 10,000. So let's say hypothetically, you wanted to work on you're doing some research on a surname. There's quite possible that there's a surname project there for Family Tree DNA where you may look into and be able to find some descendants from people names that you might recognize. And so that's more what I'm speaking about, research projects with surname. So we have haplogroup projects, we have surname projects, and those are geographical projects, etc. And so those are the types of group projects that are ran by administrators, admins. And so they essentially create a group project. They might recruit testers into the project. Sometimes they even pay for testing. Or people within the project might all chip in to upgrade this tester because they know by upgrading this tester, it may break down some brick walls and give them just more pieces of information. And so that was essentially the purpose of those group projects. So if you're doing research, just as an example, maybe some of the surnames in your family, just Google FTDNA and that surname and see if a project comes up, and just look at the project on the DNA results and just kind of see, if that's how that looks for you. But for me, it's been really beneficial, even though I'm mostly like African. I've been able to find like enslavers for different lines of my family. And so some of them I use the FTDNA group projects to get information. Even like my surname is McCrae. I looked at the McCrae surname project and I start to see names through my research, who lived in the same county, in the same towns and places of the people who enslaved my family. And so, yeah, definitely. So that's what they can help assist you with is
Okay. Is anyone researching Abraham Lincoln?
there might be a Lincoln project out there. So that could be, because we have so many projects there, there's just no way to really know. So I would maybe look at the Lincoln project or send me an email.
Okay. Okay.
Just, yeah, if you send me an email, I can kind of look at that
Okay.
and get back with you.
All right.
I see another question from Iris, or you can go ahead with the questions. I'm sorry.
I can't talk too much because my voice is going. I'm Teresa Vega. I'm with CC Moore co-admitting the Malagasy Roots Project. I'm routinely asked a question regarding the overall percentage, ballpark percentage of the number of African-American women who have European mtDNA.
Yeah, I would have to do a query to actually get that information. We'd have to run some queries within a database to kind of give you that
Okay.
information. Let me make sure I'm reading that right. What percentage of African American women have you? Yeah, that's something we would have to do a query on to see if we're even able to answer
I
that.
think Shannon has asked that question a number of times of a number of different companies, and everybody hedges. And it's a number that I'm routinely asked about. I have a European haplogroup, but
Yeah.
mine is not connected to enslavement. And I know who I had an Irish second great grandmother who came after 1870. So a lot of people would like that information.
Yeah, it's actually valid, I think, now that I think about it, because we know that 40% of African American males have a European Y chromosome.
Is that the percentage now? So it's up from 35%?
Roughly, I mean, it's still the same part, 35, 40%. Yeah, it's still somewhere roughly, but honestly, I don't know if anybody ever really took a dive into your question. So that's something that I could actually look into. I could ask someone from the research team or a population geneticist on Monday, see if they can run some queries and see if I can get that information for you.
And then one of the other things I want to co-sign on Shannon's blog post about African ancestry. Having led this project with CC over a decade now, we're still getting information and having members get certificates printed with saying that their Malagasy haplogroups are Native American. And Shannon wrote this wonderful blog. I'm going to be publishing my own blog that will visually show people, because I think people are visual folks, at least I am, what their markers are compared to ftDNA markers, because this has been going on too long and people are afraid to state the obvious that it's a scam. And Shannon's one of the bravest, and a whole lot of other folks that are in the game already know this, but your general public, they need to know.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely something that, I battle with myself, because it really pains me to see somebody pay $300 for a test that we sell for $59. And we know that I know that based off of doing a Y12 test that some of my matches aren't real, or we're related 20,000 years ago. And so it's essentially the same thing. Like when you're matching somebody in the African ancestry database, we're only looking at 9 markers or whatever, chances are you're not even related to that person. They're just showing up because of convergence. That number had to mute, that 14 had to mutate eventually back to 14 again. And so that's just a snapshot. And so, yeah, I think they're, go ahead.
Yeah. One last thing is because of this, and well, separate from this, I'm going to be writing a paper with Wendy Wilson Fall, who also is an advisor to the Malagasy Roots Project, and it's going to be presented to a panel of historians who are specialists in the Indian Ocean world, so we can actually show how African Americans today have found their Malagasy cousins based on ftDNA's Malagasy Roots Project. So it'll be the first time we put that information out there with microhistories included. So we thank you. And like I tell people, if you do not have a DNA cousin match, you know, you have to have it with these tests. So, you know, and it proves it definitively. That's why we do MT and Y DNA tests to find out where your origins are, and then go from there and then bring it down to autosomal. So it's incredible work, and we support what you're doing.
I appreciate it. I'll take a look at y'all project here and there. I think I actually added someone from y'all project to the Discover mtDNA. I think it was an African woman that went to Canada. Her last name might have been Fortunate or something like that.
I'm not disclosing this, but yeah, Rose Fortune is our direct ancestor, and thanks to your project, we now identified, and I'm not officially announcing it till probably June, but we've found one of her first daughters that connects to her, and her maternal line is from here where I am.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
so
was
we'll
pretty awesome.
talk after. Yeah.
Sure. Definitely.
All right, thank you so much. I see that Nikki O has raised her hand.
Hi guys. I just have a question for Sherman and then a question for Teresa regarding the Malagasy project. So Sherman, could you tell us when, or do you have a rough idea of when they're going to roll out the mtDNAs for ftDNA for the people that uploaded? And then for
Roots Tech.
Teresa, for the Malagasy Roots project, do you have to have a Malagasy mtDNA? Because my mom has a Malagasy ancestor, but no mtDNA. And then I have other people that are not on ftDNA that have Malagasy ancestors that are proven. And that's
All right. Yeah, our new rollout happens around Roots or during Roots Tech. So what is that? 2 weeks? That's when you'll be able to utilize the new mtDNA feature.
And Nikki, we can talk later, but this is a project, so we do require an MT or a Y DNA haplogroup. However, I would suggest if we'll talk out, I don't want to take it up. We'll talk offline about testing other people in your family.
Yes, and I see that Delbra Brown has raised her hand. Delbra?
Thank you, Shannon. This question is for you. So when the video that you shared was really amazing about the family and the Johnsons and Frederick. So when was that taken, or when did you share the new news for them?
Great question. So that recording refers to a conversation that took place in June of last year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I see that Iris Grant has raised her hand.
Thank you, Shannon. I just wanted to re-ask the question that I put in the chat about not having any matches whatsoever. I'm not sure if something went wrong with the test or if that's something common with African Americans.
Oh, you want to answer, Shannon, or I could answer?
Let you answer it. I think we're going to have the same answer.
Oh, well, just I mean, well, that's the thing, and that's like one of the things that I want to encourage is like for African Americans to do more advanced DNA testing, so we can start to fill in those gaps. And so sometimes you might be the trailblazer, you might be the first person in thousands of years who've ever done a Y DNA test, and so this is also why I encourage us to also utilize target testing. You know, we have those autosomal matches on ancestry that look like they might appear to come from this line. Well, you know, I started reaching out to them, looking for a direct male descendant to test them and start seeing if that theory can be true or not. So in essence, some branches of the haplotree they can be African. Like my M96 branch is African, but I have way more matches than my other branches that I've tested. Like my second great grandfather's branch, he is on the A branch. He only has, you know, a couple matches, but his haplogroup goes back 150,000 years or so. And so I have some other EM2 branches, and people just hadn't tested. And so I think my opinion is like we as African Americans, genealogists, I think we're kind of behind in terms of testing I think we're like right now we're still mostly doing autosomal, but I mean I understand why we're doing autosomal because we're getting a lot more information from there. But at some point, I think we also need to utilize other testing avenues and resources and like mtDNA and y-DNA, et cetera. So I guess to answer your question, some branches that have more people to test, they're going to have more matches. But if you come from and it can still be an EM2 branch, you know, that's where having your SNPs tested could like redefine that branch and it will show like where you actually are going to be placed. And so just because you're EM2, for example, you know, it doesn't mean that you're going to come back with matches or whatever the haplogroup was. You need people on that branch to test. And so it looks like you might have been a trailblazer, the first person that might have tested in the ever, quite possibly. It just starts from somewhere. We're just kind of behind.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It says it's confirmed Y haplogroup is EL485.
Yeah, that seems to be still a pretty old SNP. EL485 is still probably thousands of years old, so it might not be EM2. Maybe with when we ran the provide the haplogroup, you know, we test SNPs, autosomal SNPs, so they probably tested some SNPs and came up with EL485. But if you look at like the Y Discover tool, if you click on that, for the Discover page. So you click on the Discover haplogroup report and you click on the time tree, et cetera. It's going to give you the date for that SNP. And I'm pretty sure that SNP is still 4,000 years old or whatnot. So it's not recent, like, you know, within 100, 500 years or even 1,000. So it's still a really old SNP. And we just need more people to test, more African descended males to test. And like I was mentioning earlier, I know 40%, roughly 40% of African Americans males, they seem to come back with a European haplogroup, but of course we're still out there with African haplogroups, but not a lot of us are doing like much advanced testing.
Gotcha. So yeah, I guess it's EL45 is 7100 BCE.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Time ago. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Are there any additional questions? Yes, now is your time. Or forever hold your peace. All right. Anyone? All right. I see that we have a few hands raised now. Let's see here. Yes, Rochelle.
I actually wanted to go last, but that's okay. On behalf of the association, I just wanted to thank everybody, especially the gentleman from across the pond. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for showing up. Thank you, Shannon, as the producer of this series and your presentation today. Thank you, Sherman, for your presentation. And Nika is not here, but thank her. I had put in chat that, you know, this was a highly technical presentation, but so amazing and so exciting. And for those who have the gift of this space, I know Karen is on the call, I believe, still. And I know from the very first time I met her, she was extremely passionate about this. So it's great to see her thriving in this space. And for those of you like Jerome, I know you're excited about it. But again, these are your gifts. And you guys go with it. I fully support you. And I thank you again.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, for those wonderful words. And I think that Nikki O had her hand up.
Yes, I was gonna tell Sherman, I'm gonna email you after the presentation because the Spans and the Baxters actually relate to me on my gas line. And my gas is my third great grandfather was sold down from South Carolina during slavery, and I'm related to a lot of gases from Sumter County. Then I have a great grandmother from Clarendon. So a lot of the people you were talking about, you might be my cousin. So that's why I'll email you. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, hit me up. We could connect.
All right. And We can get through some of the questions that are in the chat now, if no one is looking to raise their hand at this time. So I'm just looking all of these questions over. I know there was a conversation in the chat regarding false negative matching and certain matches not showing up, or should I say uneven matching, where one person can see the match, but the matching person cannot see them. And apparently this is at ancestry. So it's important to understand that at ancestry, there is a feature called timber, which is like a lawnmower, if you will. It goes through and chops down DNA segments based on the algorithm's understanding of what constitutes a DNA segment that's indicative of a recent common ancestor. So in other words, if too many people share the same DNA segment, timber says, oh, this is not indicative of a recent common ancestor. And so that 40 centimorgans that you were sharing gets cut down to, say, 10 centimorgans. But in addition to that, Ancestry a few years ago decided to reduce the matching threshold, meaning that, or should I say, they increased the matching threshold, which reduced the number of matches. In other words, it used to be that you were a match if you shared 6 centimorgans of DNA at Ancestry. Now, it is such that you are not a match unless you share 8 centimorgans at least. And that's after the timber algorithm has mowed the lawn. However, Ancestry provided us with an opportunity to save those matches that were below that 8 centimorgan threshold. So if you were very attentive to your matches and did what you needed to do to save those matches, they will still appear on your match list. However, if your match did not do the same, then you will not appear on their match list. Now, to put this all in context, the question referred to a situation where the person was sharing more than 8 centimorgans. So that is just a case that is very bizarre. I would love to hear what Ancestry has to say about it. I do not have an explanation for it. All right, other questions? Can a haplogroup letter change from K to L? It's an interesting question. So there is a phylogenetic tree, which lists essentially the genealogy of the haplogroups. And so these changes that have happened over time, thousands of years. And so if you want to trace how haplogroup letters have changed, whether for the Y chromosome or for mitochondrial DNA, you do have the ability to do that. And I recommend doing that at either Family Tree DNA or at 23andMe. And you also have the ability to do that to some extent at Living DNA. So just keep that in mind. Very interesting question there. All right. And I am scanning the chat for any additional questions. And yes, as Martin has written in the chat, check out ISOGG, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. All right. Do we have any additional questions that have not been placed in the chat? Anything pertaining to living DNA at this time?
I just had a question regarding for living DNA. Oh, I think he answered it. My question was FTDNA. I had uploaded my results, and just how long did it take for that to be processed?
It'll be quick.
Right.
Probably
This is
about probably less than 2 hours. Yeah.
Okay. And then for FTDNA, what is that process?
Well, I do believe Sherman has left us.
He left. Okay. It's going through the process, so it may be by the end of day. Thank you.
The
No problem
final
at all.
matching service might take a bit longer though.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, so I will launch our matching service tomorrow. So you'll get results for matching either end of Monday or beginning of Tuesday. We tend to run it 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay, because that's what's
We
pending.
don't. Yeah, our matching service is not sort of N+1, if you like. You can't just add one sample in and get matches out. We do it in batches, so it works out roughly 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Right, and I see that Iris Grant has raised her hand. Iris.
Thank you so much, Shannon. This question may have been answered earlier, but I did not hear the answer. If someone has both European and African ancestry, will taking a living DNA test produce more, excuse me, produce more European matches, African matches? What is the population of your database?
Our database is the biggest population there is British. So you're probably going to get more European matches than African matches. That said, we've got quite a few African customers now and African American customers because since we launched the African panel, we've seen higher numbers in African customers, but still statistically we've got more European customers.
I'm going to add something here. I've taken living DNA. My European is almost equal to my African, about 45%, 46%. My second great grandmother is Irish, so there was a lot of matches we had, and they correctly gave us a lot of new information. And if you have any, I know being half Puerto Rican as well, I have a lot of cousins who are half Puerto Rican, and people don't realize that in many of the Caribbean islands, the preferential treatment was given to Catholics. So a lot of the Irish actually emigrated to Puerto Rico in the 1700s under the Royal Decree of Graces. I have a funny story because I have a fourth cousin on my Irish side, and she said, we have the same third great grandparents, and she thought she was talking to my brother Michael and had this long conversation. And then I was talking to her and she's like, well, Michael told me this. And I'm like, you know, Michael? And when we finally figured it out a day later, it was another Puerto Rican cousin with the same name. So you have to keep that into account, that even though if you have any Caribbean, it might show up. And again, if you consider the Irish, the Scots, English, all involved in trafficking. So it's just a thought too. It's something that you might want to take if your percentage is high.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I see that Elizabeth Olson has raised her hand.
Yes, for living DNA, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I uploaded my dad's autosomal DNA to you. Can you do can you accept uploads from Big Y 700 or full sequence mitochondrial DNA?
No, not for matching, because it's not autosomal DNA. So it would have to be the data. I think what they call what FTDNA call their autosomal testing?
Family Finder.
Family Finder. It's the Family Finder data. We don't do our matching service is essentially based upon autosomal DNA. So if by uploading Y or MT results, we can't process that, unfortunately.
Not so much for matching, but just to get a haplogroup.
I don't think, to be honest with you, if you've already got one from Family Tree, I don't think we'd be able to offer you anything deeper in terms of understanding. It's something we thought about doing, but it's very contextual, because obviously it's like Family Tree DNA. They've tuned, like as we do, we've tuned our methods to work, our classifications of haplogroups to work with our DNA testing methods.
Yeah.
So, you know, it makes it tricky if you're accepting data from a third party to then be able to handle it in a way that's better than they can.
The only data that we accept for uploads is autosomal data. Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question. I have my dad's DNA, I think everywhere you can have it. And no two companies seem to agree on how to define what Germany is. I thank Teresa. The look on your face says it all. And it's really hard to, and I can follow the paper trail, and I know who was born and raised in Germany to German parents, and it's just not showing up in the percentages that I would think. I mean, not even close.
Is this with our results with Living DNA for European ancestry breakdown?
Yeah, it's everybody has,
everybody,
except for Ancestry, where they seem to be extremely generous on how to define what's German.
I'll leave that comment. I'll leave that one to you, Gerard, because you know.
Do I? Well,
yeah.
Well, we currently have 3 Germanic regions that we call Germany, but yeah, it is complicated because it's yeah. For example, I think it is the northwestern Germany population that we've got includes Denmark, for example, and surely there is a difference between them, but we don't show it because it's just complicated to find what makes them different and what makes them similar to the surrounding populations. There's a couple of regions in Germany in France, for example, that have switched from France to Germany during history so many times that genetically we don't really know if they are considered German or not, and the same is probably true for other regions in the country. So it is a complicated question, yeah. And I'm not surprised that no 2 companies have similar definitions of what it is.
Okay, well, let us know when you have more of an idea.
Will do.
Thank you.
All right. Next question. Going once.
I had a question for Living DNA. How do I see ancient matches? I know I'm processing, but how do I see ancient matches and not just Viking? Is that an upgrade?
It's a different upgrade. Yes, classical. It's called classical. So that it's not matching. It's do you know what? I'm going to let Gerard explain it because he wrote the method and he really understands.
Well,
it very well.
It's as Martin was saying, it is a different product. We've got 3 different upgrades at the minute. One of them is Viking, the other one is classical, which includes ancient Roman, ancient Greeks, and ancient Egyptians, and the other one is Neanderthal and Denisova, which is a completely different thing. But yeah, there are 3 different upgrades that you can get separately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Nikki O.
just uploaded to Living DNA, and I was wondering, what is your representation for the indigenous population? Because I know a lot of African Americans are triracial with African, European, and indigenous. So I wanted to know what the reference panels were looking like for that. Thank you.
We've got not a lot of indigenous representation, indigenous American representations at the minute. That's something we are working on. We've got a few for, I think we've got two for, I'm not entirely sure now, I'd have to look, but we've got, usually what happens with African Americans or other people that have Native American ancestry is that the closest group is the one that they get matches to that closest group, and I think we call them Indigenous North American. It's just we don't really break it down at the minute, I don't think.
All right. Thank you for that. And it's so interesting that question came up, because there are so many who take genetic tests expecting to see Indigenous American ancestry reflected in their results, but they often do not. And they then challenge the test or challenge the research. And I tell people all the time, there are lots of reasons for why that happens. And some of those do have to do with how the test is set up, how the algorithms work, the depth and breadth of the reference panels. And then there are other reasons that have more to do with the fables that their ancestors have told them in some cases. And we have to remember that in the United States, we have dealt with a racially stratified society. And there are individuals of obvious European African admixture who have utilized Native American ancestry, or the claim of Native American ancestry, to navigate the perils and pitfalls of that racially stratified society, to explain away their appearance and be part of one group while also being a part of another group. There's also the issue of individuals descending from African descended families who were enslaved by Native American groups. And the story of being connected to a Native American tribe, if you will, gets murky as it's told over the generations, and people lose sight of the fact that there was this enslavement that may or may not have been indicative of a biological connection to the actual tribe that was enslaving them. So there are all sorts of reasons for Native American ancestry not necessarily being reflected in one's DNA test results. The other reason, or one of the other reasons, is that perhaps there was a Native American ancestor who was too far back for an autosomal DNA test, a biogeographical analysis of the autosomal DNA, to show that ancestor's contribution, because over time, through the process of recombination, you or whomever you have tested did not inherit that piece of genetic information. And so that's why Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA are so important in those cases. So I just wanted to add that. I apologize if I have bored you to tears.
That's a great answer.
For anybody who wants to, I have a blog. I think I put my blog in, hopefully my blog went into the main chat. If you just scroll down, I wrote my first part one of the DNA trail like in 2015, so the information is old. I'm currently writing a book right now. However, the haplogroups you can look and see and then just Google what the updated one is. But I've written 3. So part 1 was just letting people know how to detect Malagasy ancestry. DNA trail part 2 was about my line. I have 2 separate lines right here in New York due to the early trade under the Dutch. And then I have my 3rd line, my 2nd line, I should say, is on my maternal grandmother's side out of colonial Virginia. And in Wendy Wilson Fall's book on Madagascar, Memories of Madagascar and the Black Atlantic, she details the fact that my 8th enslaver great-grandfather, Robert King Carter, was the main purchaser of enslaved Malagasy. And of course, you can go, there's a whole line of collateral families that spread out from there. So, and then I recently wrote, well, I have the one on the Van Wickle slave trade, where we connected some of our members of the Malagasy Roots Project to having been sold south in 1818. And the last one was on Sophie Henry. It's a micro history of one of our matches who was born in Madagascar, taken to Mauritius, enslaved. She was accused of burning down her master's house and was sent to Australia as a convict because she was pregnant, and she died. We just found out recently she died as an Indigenous person in Australia, was taken for Indigenous and was buried in an Indigenous cemetery. So you can just go through my blog and find all that information there.
All right, thank you for that. Do we have any additional questions?
This is Deborah. I sent Martin a direct message.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. All right. Any more questions, comments, concerns, dilemmas?
Shannon,
So I
just
see
that-
there is a
just-
question in the chat. What is the blog information? Presumably
Did it
you're
go in the
referring.
chat? Okay, so let me do it again. Let's see. Did it go?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you ever so much, Teresa.
And did I keep going back to the initial clustering chart? Did you talk about how people who have endogamy in their family, that chart looks very different?
We did not discuss that, as we were just discussing DNA basics, and we know that some people here may
Okay.
not have even heard of endogamy.
Okay, so we won't do that. Okay.
That's a whole new talk.
That's
All of
true. That's
itself,
true. That's
endogamy.
true.
It's really not. It's not an easy thing to solve at all.
No. Yeah, you're
No.
right.
I think the best thing is to just educate people and say that you're not
True.
lucky to have so many thousands of third cousins. It's because you're from an endogamous population group, and yeah.
The bane of my existence.
I'm not even certain that you can compensate for it that well without like making some very heuristic decisions about who these people are, and I hate heuristic solutions because it's a fudge. There's no understanding of the underlying mechanism in a particular way. But there are cool tools that you can look at, like runs of homozygosity. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah, so that to me, I think, is probably a good place to understand if you would be a member of an endogamous population is runs of homozygosity.
Yes, and just for those who do not know, endogamy refers to situations where populations are sort of bottlenecked, if you will, in the sense that everyone is descending from the same group of families, if you will, at a really extreme level. I think one of the best examples involves the Ashkenazi Jewish population A lot of Caribbean island populations have this, and to a lesser extent, free people of color populations in the eastern United States encounter this as well. And runs of homozygosity refers to places in your genome where the DNA on your paternal copy of a certain chromosome is identical to pieces of DNA on your maternal copy of a certain chromosome. In other words, your parents are related and have passed down the same DNA segment to you. And you can see that if you go to GEDmatch, for those of you who are familiar with that site, you will see there is a feature called Are Your Parents Related? And based on the number of runs of homozygosity measured in centimorgans, they will provide you with a prediction of how related your parents are. So just in case anyone wanted to know, forgive me if I've bored you once more. Any more questions? All right. I see that it is 3:08 my time, Eastern time. And so that means, if I remember correctly, it is about 8:08 p.m. in the United Kingdom right now. Am I right?
That's correct.
Which means it is definitely time for dinner for Gerard and Martin.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and dinners in the United Kingdom are so different when you go to a pub or to any restaurant, from my perspective, because you have to wait a long time before you actually get a plate of food. So we don't want to starve our guests tonight. We want to thank them for taking the time to meet with us. It has been fantastic. And for those who are asking whether I am teaching at Maggie in 2025, at this point, the DNA track for this year, apparently, is just going to be track A. And I do track B. So that is where we are for this summer, but stay tuned. And again, thank you all for coming. Martin and Gerard, we thank you for sacrificing your time and coming to be with us on a Saturday. And to all the speakers, thank you ever so much. And everyone who has participated in any way, we love you for doing so. We want to thank Brenda Stone Browder for being a co-host. We want to thank Rochelle Sanders Prater for being so kind as to indulge me in putting on this particular series. And we want to thank everyone who came out. Again, you want to check your syllabus, the syllabus that I created for you, about information regarding joining our Jesuit enslaved descendant DNA project, both at GEDmatch as well as on Family Tree DNA. And also there is an opportunity to share your Ancestry DNA match results with us as well, if you so wish. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and enjoy this super Saturday.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I learned a lot.
Wonderful. So glad you could join us.